Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The CB radio crackled with static as Boyd Axelrod adjusted his grip on the frozen steering wheel. 23 years of driving the Dalton Highway, and January storms still made his knuckles white. The temperature gauge on his Peterbilt showed minus 42 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Inside the cab, it wasn't much better. The heater was fighting a losing battle against the Arctic cold, seeping through every seal and rivet. Boyd had left Fairbanks 6 hours ago with a load of drilling equipment bound for Prudhoe Bay. The weather report had warned about incoming storm systems, but the company needed this delivery yesterday. They always did. That's how it worked up here. The oil fields didn't stop for weather, and neither did the truckers who kept them running. The first snowflakes had started falling around mile marker 175. Now, at mile marker 238, Boyd couldn't see past his hood ornament. The world outside had turned into a swirling white void. His headlights were useless, swallowed by the blizzard like everything else. The only thing keeping him on the road was muscle memory and the barely visible reflector posts that appeared like ghosts every few seconds in the maelstrom. Boyd reached for his CB radio, clicking it to channel 19. "Breaker, breaker, this is Blue Steel northbound at 238. Anybody copy?" The static that answered him was thick and angry, punctuated by distant voices too garbled to understand. The storm was killing communications. He tried his satellite phone next, but the screen showed no signal. Not unusual this far north, especially in weather like this. The wind hit his truck from the side, and Boyd felt the trailer start to slide. He turned into it instinctively, feathering the brakes just enough to regain control. 50,000 pounds of steel and cargo didn't forgive mistakes. One wrong move and he'd be jackknifed in a ditch, and in this weather, that was a death sentence. Boyd's dispatcher, Mavis Crow, had called him just before he lost signal. Her voice had been tight with concern. "Boyd, Weather Service just upgraded this to a severe blizzard warning. Maybe you should find somewhere to pull off." But there was nowhere to pull off on this stretch of the Dalton. It was just him, the road, and 300 miles of frozen nothing. The windshield wipers were losing their battle against the ice. Every few minutes, Boyd had to lean forward and scrape at the inside of the glass with his fingernails where his breath was freezing. His fingers were numb despite the thick gloves. The cold had a way of finding you up here, no matter how many layers you wore. Something caught his eye in the white void ahead, a shape, darker than the surrounding snow. Boyd squinted, trying to make it out. It looked like a vehicle, maybe another truck, stopped in the middle of the road. He started pumping his brakes, feeling the wheels lock and release on the ice. The speedometer dropped from 40 to 30, then 20. As he got closer, Boyd could make out more details. It was definitely a semi, a Kenworth by the look of it, parked at an odd angle across both lanes. No emergency flashers, no flares. Just sitting there like it had been abandoned. Boyd brought his truck to a stop about 50 feet back, his engine idling rough in the cold. He grabbed his heavy parka from behind the seat and zipped it up to his chin. The moment he opened the door, the wind tried to rip it from its hinges. The cold hit him like a physical thing, stealing his breath and making his eyes water instantly. Ice crystals formed on his eyelashes before he could blink them away. Boyd approached the abandoned truck carefully. The snow was already drifting against its wheels, which meant it had been here for at least an hour. He could barely see through the blizzard, had to keep one hand on the truck's side to maintain his bearings. When he reached the driver's door, he pulled himself up on the step and peered through the window. Empty. The seat was empty, but the keys were still in the ignition. Boyd tried the door handle and found it unlocked. He climbed inside, grateful to be out of the wind even for a moment. The cab was cold, but not as cold as it should have been if it had been sitting for hours. The engine was off, but when Boyd touched the dashboard, he could still feel a hint of warmth. There was a logbook on the passenger seat. Boyd picked it up, recognizing the company logo, North Star Transport, out of Anchorage. The last entry was from today, just 3 hours ago. The driver's name was listed as Tom Henley. Boyd didn't know him personally, but the name was familiar. Most of the ice road drivers knew each other, at least by reputation. Something else caught his attention. There were dark stains on the driver's seat. Boyd leaned closer, pulling out his flashlight. The beam revealed what looked like blood, not much, but enough to be concerning. There were more drops leading across to the passenger door, which was slightly ajar. Boyd climbed back out into the storm, fighting his way around to the other side of the truck. The passenger door was indeed open, banging against its frame in the wind. The blood trail continued down the steps and onto the snow, but the blizzard had already erased any tracks that might have been there. He stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it. A driver, injured maybe? But why leave the truck in the middle of the road? Why not use the emergency flashers or set out flares? And where did he go? There was nothing out here for miles in any direction. On foot in this weather, you'd last maybe 20 minutes before hypothermia set in. Boyd made his way back to his own truck, already shivering despite the heavy coat. He needed to call this in, but his radio and phone were still dead. The smart thing would be to wait out the storm, but he couldn't just sit here. Tom Henley was out there somewhere, injured and probably freezing to death. He decided to drive around the abandoned truck and continue north for a few miles. Maybe Tom had tried to walk to the next pull-off. It was a long shot, but Boyd couldn't just do nothing. He maneuvered his Peterbilt carefully around the Kenworth, his trailer barely clearing the ditch on the right side. The storm seemed to be getting worse. Wind gusts were hitting 60, maybe 70 miles per hour, rocking his truck like a toy. Visibility was down to absolutely nothing. Boyd was driving by feel now, keeping the rumble strip under his right tires to stay oriented. Every instinct told him to stop, but he kept going. 5 miles past the abandoned truck, Boyd saw something that made his blood run cold. There were lights ahead, but not vehicle lights. These were smaller, handheld maybe, moving in patterns that didn't make sense. They appeared and disappeared in the blizzard like fireflies, but fireflies didn't exist in Alaska, especially not in January at 40 below. Boyd slowed to a crawl, peering through the windshield. The lights were getting closer, or he was getting closer to them. He could make out shapes now, human shapes, several of them standing in the road. They weren't wearing the bright colors of road crews or emergency responders. These figures were dressed in dark clothing, almost invisible except for the lights they carried. One of the figures raised its hand, and Boyd saw it was holding what looked like a flare, but the light was wrong. Too white, too steady. The figure waved it back and forth slowly, mechanically, like it was performing some kind of signal. The other figure stood perfectly still despite the howling wind that should have been knocking them over. Boyd's hand went to the gear shift, ready to reverse. Something about this was deeply wrong. These people shouldn't be here. Nobody should be standing in the middle of the Dalton Highway in a blizzard unless they had a death wish. He flashed his high beams, hoping to get a better look at their faces, but the snow reflected the light back, creating a white wall. One of the figures started walking toward his truck. The walk was strange, too steady for the ice, too calm for the wind. Boyd could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to get out of there, but the rational part of his brain kept saying these might be people who needed help. The figure reached the front of his truck and stood there, just outside the range of clear visibility. It raised one arm and pointed to the side of the road. Boyd followed the gesture and saw more lights in the distance, leading off into the darkness beyond the highway. They formed a rough line, like runway lights, disappearing into the Arctic wasteland. Boyd's radio suddenly burst to life, making him jump. But instead of voices, there was just a rhythmic clicking sound, like someone tapping on a microphone. Click, click, click. Pause. Click, click. Pause, click, click, click. The pattern repeated over and over, and Boyd realized with a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature that it was Morse code. SOS. But the signal wasn't coming through the emergency channel. It was on a frequency nobody used, one that should have been dead air. Boyd reached for the radio, about to respond, when all the lights outside suddenly went dark. The figures, the lights leading off the road, everything vanished like they had never been there. Boyd sat in the darkness, engine idling, heart racing. The only sound was the wind howling around his cab and that clicking on the radio. He grabbed his spotlight from under the seat and shined it through the windshield. Nothing. The road was empty. No footprints, no sign anyone had been standing there seconds ago. The clicking on the radio stopped, replaced by a voice. It was faint, distorted by static, but Boyd could make out the words, "Don't follow the lights. Whatever you do, don't follow the lights." The voice was familiar. It sounded like Tom Henley. Boyd grabbed his radio mic. Tom Henley? This is Boyd Axelrod. Where are you?" But there was no response, just static. He tried again, switching through different channels, but the airwaves were dead again. A loud bang on the side of his truck made Boyd nearly jump out of his seat. He swung the spotlight around and saw someone pressed against his driver's door. It was a man in a torn parka, his face covered in ice and blood. The man was pounding weakly on the door, his mouth moving, but his words lost in the wind. Boyd recognized him immediately. It was Tom Henley. He grabbed the door handle and pulled, fighting against the wind to get it open. Tom practically fell into the cab, his body shaking violently from the cold. His lips were blue, his fingers blackened with frostbite. Boyd slammed the door shut and cranked the heater to maximum. "Tom! Jesus, what happened to you?" Boyd grabbed a thermal blanket from his emergency kit and wrapped it around the man's shoulders. Tom's eyes were wide with terror, darting around the cab like he expected something to jump out at him. They're not human," Tom stammered through chattering teeth. "The lights, they lead you off the road, into the cold. They wait until you can't walk anymore, and then—" He trailed off, his whole body convulsing with shivers. Who's not human?" Boyd asked, but Tom had passed out, his body finally giving in to the hypothermia. Boyd checked his pulse, weak but steady. He needed to get Tom to a hospital, but the nearest one was in Coldfoot, 60 miles south through the blizzard. Boyd put the truck in gear and started to turn around when he saw them again. The lights were back, but now there were dozens of them, surrounding his truck on all sides. They moved in perfect synchronization, swaying back and forth in a pattern that hurt to look at. The figures holding them were clearer now, and Boyd wished they weren't. Their faces were wrong, too pale, too still, like masks made of frozen flesh. Their eyes reflected the lights they held, glowing with a cold luminescence that belonged to deep-sea creatures, not humans. They stood in the howling wind without moving, without blinking, watching him with those terrible glowing eyes. Boyd slammed the truck into reverse, not caring about jackknifing anymore. He had to get out of there. The truck lurched backward and the figures parted to let him pass, still maintaining their perfect formation. As he backed up, Boyd saw more of them emerging from the snow, walking out of the solid white wall of the blizzard like they were stepping through a curtain. He spun the wheel, getting the truck turned around, and floored it. The speedometer climbed past what was safe for these conditions, but Boyd didn't care. In the passenger seat, Tom was mumbling in his unconscious state, words Boyd couldn't quite make out but didn't want to understand. The lights followed them. Boyd could see them in his mirrors, keeping pace with impossible ease. No vehicle could move that fast through the storm, but these things weren't using vehicles. They were running, or floating, or something Boyd's mind couldn't process. They stayed just at the edge of visibility, a constellation of cold lights in the darkness. Boyd's fuel gauge showed 3/4 full, enough to make it to Coldfoot if the storm didn't force him off the road. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling the truck slide and correct, as he pushed through the wind and snow. Tom suddenly sat bolt upright, his eyes wide open but not seeing. "They feed on the warm ones," he said in a voice that didn't sound like his own. "They need the warm ones when the cold gets too deep. That's why they make the lights, to bring the warm ones to them." "Tom, wake up, you're hallucinating." Boyd shook his shoulder, but Tom didn't respond. He just kept talking in that flat, emotionless voice. "They've been here longer than the road, longer than the oil. They sleep under the ice until the storms come. Then they hunt. They've always hunted." Tom's head turned slowly toward Boyd, and his eyes were reflecting the dashboard lights just like those things outside. "They marked me. They'll mark you, too. The cold always finds the marked ones." Boyd's radio exploded with sound, dozens of voices all talking at once, overlapping in a cacophony that made his ears hurt. He recognized some of them. Drivers he knew, drivers who had gone missing over the years, their voices calling out coordinates, describing roads that didn't exist, inviting him to pull over, to rest, to follow the lights to safety. The storm was getting worse, if that was possible. Boyd couldn't see anything now, was driving entirely by instinct and luck. His fuel gauge was dropping faster than it should, and he realized with growing horror that his tank was leaking. One of those things must have punctured it somehow. 30 miles to Coldfoot. The engine started to sputter. 20 miles. The lights were getting closer. 10 miles. Tom was convulsing again, his body temperature dropping despite the heat blasting in the cab. 5 miles. The engine died. Boyd's truck rolled to a stop in the middle of the highway. The lights immediately surrounded them, dozens of them, creating a perfect circle in the storm. The figures holding them stood motionless, waiting. Boyd grabbed his emergency flares and his last resort, an old .44 revolver he kept hidden under his seat. He didn't know if bullets would do anything to these things, but it was better than nothing. He looked at Tom, who was unconscious again, his breathing shallow. "I'm going to get help," Boyd told him, though he didn't know if Tom could hear him. "I'm going to get us out of here." He opened the door and stepped out into the storm. The cold was beyond description, beyond pain. It was like being buried alive in ice. The figures didn't move as he stumbled through their circle, heading for what he hoped was the direction of Coldfoot. Behind him, he heard his truck doors opening. He turned to see Tom being pulled from the cab, but not by the figures. Tom was walking on his own, his movements puppet-like, jerky. He walked straight towards the lights leading off into the wasteland. "Tom, no!" Boyd tried to run back, but his legs wouldn't work right. The cold was already shutting down his body. He fell to his knees in the snow, watching helplessly as Tom disappeared into the white void, following those terrible lights. The figures turned toward Boyd now, all at once, their glowing eyes fixed on him. They started to move closer, still in perfect formation, the lights they held growing brighter. Boyd raised the revolver, his frozen fingers barely able to pull the trigger. The gunshot was swallowed by the wind. The bullet passed through one of the figures like it was made of snow. They kept coming. Boyd heard something else through the storm. An engine. Powerful, getting closer. Headlights cut through the blizzard. Real headlights, not the cold light of those things. A truck, a massive freight hauler, came barreling down the highway. The figures scattered, vanishing into the storm as quickly as they had appeared. The truck skidded to a stop beside Boyd, and the driver jumped out. Boyd couldn't make out his face through the ice forming on his own eyelashes, but he heard the voice clearly. "Jesus Christ, buddy! What are you doing out here?" Strong hands grabbed Boyd under the arms, hauling him toward the warmth of the cab. "There's another man," Boyd tried to say, but his words came out as meaningless mumbles. "Tom Henley. They took him." "There's nobody else here," the driver said, looking around. "Just you and a couple of abandoned trucks. Come on, let's get you warm." Boyd let himself be helped into the truck. As the door closed, he caught one last glimpse of the storm outside. Far, in the distance, barely visible, a line of lights was moving away into the Arctic darkness. And at the end of that line, Boyd swore he could see a figure in a torn parka, walking with the strange, jerky movements of a marionette. The driver, who introduced himself as Arlo Finch, wrapped Boyd in blankets and turned his heater on full blast. "You're lucky I came along," Arlo said, putting the truck in gear. "Nobody should be out in this weather. What happened to your rig?" Boyd tried to explain, but Arlo just looked at him with the expression people reserved for hypothermia victims who were hallucinating. "Those lights," Boyd insisted. "Did you see the lights?" "Just the northern lights, friend," Arlo said, pointing up through the windshield. "They're really putting on a show tonight." Boyd looked up and saw the aurora borealis dancing across the sky, green and blue ribbons of light. But underneath them, so faint that Arlo probably couldn't see them, were other lights. White, cold lights, moving in patterns that hurt to watch, spelling out messages in no language meant for human understanding. Arlo Finch's truck stop sat on the outskirts of Coldfoot like a beacon in the frozen wasteland. Boyd had been there dozens of times over the years, but it had never looked so welcoming as it did now, its yellow lights cutting through the dying storm. Arlo pulled his rig into the lot, navigating between the handful of other trucks that had taken shelter from the blizzard. "Let's get you inside and warmed up properly," Arlo said, helping Boyd down from the cab. Boyd's legs were still shaky, his body not quite believing it had escaped the cold. They pushed through the door into the blessed warmth of the diner attached to the truck stop. The place was nearly empty. Just two other drivers hunched over coffee at the counter, and a tired-looking waitress refilling the pot. Everyone looked up when Boyd stumbled in, still wrapped in Arlo's blankets. He must have looked like death warmed over, because the waitress immediately brought him a cup of coffee without being asked. "Rough night?" she asked, her name tag reading Donna. Boyd wrapped his hands around the mug, feeling the heat seep into his frozen fingers. "You could say that. My truck broke down about 5 miles south. Fuel leak." Arlo slid onto the stool next to him, found him wandering in the middle of the road, nearly ran him over. "You're lucky to be alive, friend. That storm's killed 3 people already this winter." Boyd's head snapped up. 3 people? Who? "Well, there was Jim Garrett back in December. Found his truck about 40 miles north of here, abandoned just like yours. Never found Jim, though. Then there was that couple, the Reynoldses. Their pickup went off the road near Prospect Creek. They found them frozen solid about 100 yards from their vehicle." "They walked away from their vehicle?" Boyd asked, though he already suspected the answer. "That's the weird part," one of the other drivers chimed in. Boyd recognized him vaguely. Carl something. Drove for Arctic Transport. All 3 vehicles were still running when they found them. Plenty of gas, heaters working, no reason to leave. Boyd stared into his coffee. Did anyone report seeing lights? Strange lights off the road? The diner went quiet. The other drivers exchanged glances. Finally, Carl spoke up. You saw them too, huh? You've seen them. Boyd leaned forward eagerly. Carl nodded slowly. Last month, during that bad blow we had around Christmas. I was coming south, just past Gobbler's Knob, when I saw lights off to the west. Looked like someone had set up camp or something, maybe gotten stuck. I almost stopped to check, but... He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. But something felt wrong about them, the way they moved, like they were floating. That's when Jim Garrett went missing, the other driver said. He was younger, Boyd didn't know him. Same area, same night probably. Donna refilled Boyd's mug. My grandmother used to tell stories, she said quietly. Old Inupiaq stories about things that lived in the deep cold. Things that would use lights to lure travelers off the path. She said they'd been here since before memory, sleeping under the permafrost until the coldest nights brought them up. That's just native superstition, Arlo said, but he didn't sound convinced. Boyd set down his mug harder than he intended. There was another driver out there, Tom Henley. He was in my truck, injured, hypothermic. When my truck died, they took him. He walked right out into the storm following those lights. Tom Henley? Carl frowned. Tom Henley died 2 years ago. Jackknifed his rig near Wiseman. I went to his funeral. The blood drained from Boyd's face. No, that's impossible. He was in my truck. He was bleeding. He talked to me. He warned me about the lights. Everyone was staring at Boyd now. Arlo put a hand on his shoulder. Hypothermia can cause hallucinations, friend. Your brain was probably just trying to make sense of what was happening. Boyd wanted to argue, but the looks on their faces stopped him. They thought he was crazy. Maybe he was, but he knew what he had seen, what he had felt. Tom Henley had been in his truck, as real as the coffee mug in his hands. His phone, finally thawed out, buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Mavis Crow, his dispatcher. Boyd, where the hell are you? Your GPS went dark 5 hours ago. The cargo needs to be in Prudhoe by morning. Boyd typed back. Truck broke down near Coldfoot. Fuel leak. Send recovery. The response was immediate. Recovery team already sent to your last GPS location. They found your truck. Boyd frowned. And what? Truck was empty. No sign of you. Where are you really? Boyd's hands started shaking. He showed the phone to Arlo. What time did you pick me up? Arlo checked his watch. About an hour ago. Why? Boyd's last GPS ping had been 5 hours ago. That meant for 4 hours. He had been... Where? What had really happened out there in the storm? He excused himself and went to the bathroom, needing a moment to think. In the harsh fluorescent light, he caught sight of himself in the mirror and gasped. His face was covered in frost burns, his lips cracked and bleeding. But that wasn't what made him step back in horror. His eyes were reflecting the light in a way they never had before. A faint, cold luminescence, like the aurora borealis trapped behind his pupils. Boyd blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, looked again. Normal. His eyes were normal, just brown, bloodshot from the cold. He was seeing things. When he returned to the diner, there was a state trooper talking to Arlo. The cop looked up as Boyd approached. Mr. Axelrod, I'm Trooper Davidson. We've been looking for you. Your company reported you missing when your GPS went dark. I'm fine, Boyd said carefully. My truck broke down. Arlo here gave me a ride. The trooper nodded, making notes. We found your truck. Also found another vehicle, an abandoned Kenworth registered to North Star Transport. You know anything about that? Boyd hesitated. I saw it. Stopped to check if anyone needed help, but it was empty. Registration says it belongs to someone named Tom Henley, but that can't be right. We've got a Tom Henley in our records, but he's been dead 2 years. The trooper studied Boyd's face. You sure you didn't see anyone? I thought I did. But the storm was bad. I might have been confused. The trooper seemed satisfied with that. The recovery team will tow your truck back to Fairbanks. Your company's sending another driver to complete the delivery. You need medical attention? Those frost burns look pretty bad. Boyd touched his face, feeling the damaged skin. I'm okay. Just need to warm up. After the trooper left, Boyd sat back down at the counter. The other drivers had gone back to their own conversations, but he could feel them stealing glances at him. Arlo ordered him a hot meal, insisted he eat something. While Boyd picked at his food, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but the area code was local. He answered it. Boyd? The voice was faint, full of static but familiar. It sounded like Tom Henley. Boyd, you need to listen to me. Boyd's blood turned to ice. He stood up, walking quickly outside where the others couldn't hear him. Who is this? You know who it is. I'm sorry I had to lie to you, but I needed your help. They had me for 2 years, Boyd. 2 years in the cold dark, neither dead nor alive. But when you stopped, when you let me in your truck, I was able to break free for a little while. This isn't real. You're dead. Everyone says you're dead. I am dead, but they don't let you go, Boyd. Not completely. They keep a part of you, use it to lure others. That's what I was supposed to do to you, lead you to them. But you're strong. You didn't follow the lights. Boyd's breath came out in clouds in the frigid air. What are they? Old? Older than the ice. They feed on warmth, on life. The Inupiaq knew about them, stayed away from their hunting grounds. But then we came, built our road right through their territory. Every winter they wake up, and every winter they take a few of us. Why are you telling me this? There was a long pause, filled with static. Because they marked you, Boyd, just like they marked me. You can see them now, can't you? Really see them, and they can see you. They'll come for you again when the next big storm hits. They always come back for the marked ones. How do I stop them? You don't. You can't. All you can do is stay away from the ice roads when the temperature drops below 40. Stay away from the storms. And whatever you do, never follow the lights. No matter what voice calls to you, no matter what face you see in the storm, never follow the lights. The line went dead. Boyd stood there in the parking lot, shivering despite his heavy coat. Above him, the northern lights danced across the clear sky, and he could swear he saw shapes moving within them, watching. He went back inside and found Arlo preparing to leave. I'm heading back south to Fairbanks, Arlo said. You want a ride? Boyd nodded. He needed to get away from here, away from the highway, away from the ice. As they walked to Arlo's truck, Boyd caught a glimpse of movement in his peripheral vision, a figure standing at the edge of the parking lot just beyond the reach of the lights. It looked like Tom Henley, but Boyd knew better than to look directly at it. He climbed into Arlo's truck and kept his eyes straight ahead as they pulled out onto the highway. The drive to Fairbanks took 4 hours. Arlo tried to make conversation at first, but Boyd couldn't focus. He kept seeing things in the darkness beyond the headlights. Shapes that shouldn't be there. Lights that moved in impossible ways. And always, that feeling of being watched. When they finally reached Fairbanks, the sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky a pale pink. Boyd had never been so happy to see daylight. Arlo dropped him off at his apartment building. "You going to be okay?" Arlo asked. Boyd forced a smile. "Yeah, just need some sleep." But he didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those faces in the storm. Those terrible glowing eyes. He called Mavis and told her he was taking some time off. She wasn't happy, but something in his voice must have convinced her not to argue. For 3 days, Boyd stayed in his apartment, trying to convince himself it had all been hallucination brought on by hypothermia, but then the news came on. Another trucker had gone missing on the Dalton Highway. Samuel Morrison, veteran driver, 15 years experience. His truck was found running but empty at mile marker 238, the exact same spot where Boyd had encountered the abandoned Kenworth. Boyd tried to call the authorities to warn them, but what could he say that wouldn't sound insane? He watched the news coverage, watched them interview Morrison's wife, watched the search teams comb the frozen wasteland, and find nothing. That night, Boyd's phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. "Hello, Boyd." It was Morrison's voice. Boyd recognized it from the news. "Tom Henley told me about you, told me you're one of the marked ones. I understand now. I understand everything." "Where are you?" Boyd asked, though he already knew the answer. "I'm with them, in the cold dark. It's not so bad once you stop fighting. Once you accept what you are now, what we are. What are you? Bait." Morrison's laugh was hollow, empty. "We're bait, Boyd. They keep us between life and death, use our voices, our memories, to call out to the living, to bring them more warmth, more life to feed on. I won't let them use me. You don't have a choice. None of us did. The mark is already on you. They can see you wherever you go, and when the next storm comes, they'll call you back. You'll hear our voices on your radio, see our lights in the distance, and eventually, you'll follow. Everyone follows eventually." The line went dead. Boyd threw his phone across the room, watching it shatter against the wall. But even broken, he could still hear the whispers coming from it. Voices of dead truckers, calling his name, giving him coordinates, begging for help. He packed a bag that night. He would leave Alaska, go somewhere warm, somewhere far from the ice and snow. But at the airport, every flight was delayed. A massive storm system was moving in, the worst of the winter. All planes grounded indefinitely. Boyd went back to his apartment and barricaded the door. He could feel it building, the pull northward. Like a fishhook in his brain, tugging him toward the Dalton Highway. The storm would be here soon, and when it came, they would come with it. As he sat in his dark apartment, Boyd's eyes caught something on the window. Frost was forming on the inside of the glass, spreading in patterns that looked almost like writing. As he watched, words became clear. "Come back to the road, Boyd. We're waiting." Boyd closed his eyes, trying to shut it out, but he could see the lights even with his eyes closed. They pulsed behind his eyelids like a heartbeat, calling him home to the ice. The storm hit Fairbanks at 3 a.m. Boyd knew because he hadn't slept in 4 days, couldn't sleep with the voices whispering constantly in his head. They grew louder as the temperature dropped, clearer as the wind picked up. By the time the blizzard was in full force, it sounded like a chorus of the dead was standing right outside his door. Boyd had tried everything to block them out. Headphones with music blasting, white noise machines, even wrapping his head in towels. Nothing worked. The voices weren't coming through his ears, they were inside his mind, broadcasting directly to whatever part of him had been marked that night on the highway. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of a rundown building near the industrial district. The windows rattled with each gust of wind, and snow was already piling up against the glass. The power flickered twice before going out completely, plunging him into darkness. The emergency lighting in the hallway lasted about 10 minutes before those batteries died too. Boyd sat in the dark, wrapped in every blanket he owned, and waited. He knew they were coming. He could feel them moving through the storm, getting closer with each passing hour. The whispers told him exactly where they were, like a GPS tracking system he couldn't turn off. 15 miles out, Boyd, Highway 3. 10 miles, Farmers Loop Road. 5 miles, University Avenue. We're here, Boyd. We're right outside. Boyd looked out his frost-covered window. The streetlights were dark, knocked out by the storm, but there were other lights down there. Dozens of them, arranged in perfect rows, leading from his building's entrance out into the street and beyond. They pulsed in unison, a heartbeat of cold light that made his eyes water to look at. His phone, the one he'd smashed against the wall, started ringing. The pieces had been scattered across his floor for days. The screen shattered, the battery separated from the body. But still it rang, the broken speaker crackling with static. Boyd didn't want to answer it, but his hand moved on its own, picking up the largest piece of the phone and holding it to his ear. "Hello, Boyd." It was Mavis Crow's voice, but wrong, distorted. "Why haven't you been answering my calls? We need you back on the road. There's a special delivery that only you can make." "Mavis?" Boyd's voice cracked. "Is that really you?" "Of course it's me. Who else would be calling you at this ungodly hour? Listen, I've got a load that needs to go north, past Prudhoe Bay, past everything. It's important, Boyd. More important than you know. There's nothing past Prudhoe Bay. That's the end of the road. Not anymore. They've built a new road, Boyd, a special road. It goes all the way to the cold dark. That's where the delivery needs to go. You're the only one who can see the way, the only one with the marks." Boyd hung up, or tried to. The phone piece was dead in his hand. Had been dead this whole time. But he could still hear Mavis talking. "Don't be difficult, Boyd. You know you have to come. It's not a choice anymore. Look at your hands." Boyd looked down. In the darkness, his hands were glowing with the same cold light as the things outside. Faint, but unmistakable. The marks were spreading, becoming visible. He rushed to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. His eyes were worse now. The aurora light behind them was brighter, swirling with colors that shouldn't exist. But it was his skin that made him step back in horror. There were patterns under the surface, like frozen veins, spreading from his eyes down his face and neck. They pulsed with that same synchronized rhythm as the lights outside. A knock at his door made him jump. Not a pounding or violent knock, just 3 polite taps. "Boyd, it's Arlo. Arlo Finch. I'm worried about you, buddy. Can you open up?" Boyd moved toward the door, then stopped. Arlo's voice was perfect, exactly as he remembered it. Too perfect. And how would Arlo know where he lived? He'd never told him. "I know you're in there, Boyd. I can see your light. You're glowing pretty bright now. Must be almost ready." "Ready for what?" Boyd asked through the door. "Ready to come home. We've prepared a special place for you. Somewhere you'll never be cold again. Somewhere the loneliness can't touch you. Isn't that what every trucker wants? An end to the endless road?" Boyd backed away from the door. "You're not Arlo." "I'm as much Arlo as Arlo ever was. Just improved, enhanced. We all are, Boyd. Tom Henley, Sam Morrison, Jim Garrett, all of us. We're part of something bigger now, something that's been waiting so long for enough warm ones to complete the pattern." "What pattern?" "The pattern that opens the way. Every marked one is a point of light. When we have enough points, we can draw the map to the source of all warmth. The map to where your kind cluster in the millions, all that life, all that heat, just waiting to be harvested." Boyd's blood ran cold. "You're talking about the cities, the populated areas. Smart man. The old ones have been trapped up here so long, feeding on scraps. the occasional trucker or hunter who wanders too far into their territory. But with enough marked ones, they can expand their reach. Follow the roads to where the real feast awaits. Boyd grabbed a baseball bat from his closet, though he knew it would be useless. I won't help you. You already are. Every second you exist with those marks, you're broadcasting a signal. You're a beacon, Boyd, and beacons can't help but shine. The door started to frost over from the outside, ice spreading across the wood in fractal patterns. The lock clicked open on its own, and the door swung inward, bringing a swirl of snow and impossibly cold air. Arlo Finch stood in the doorway, but it wasn't really Arlo anymore. His skin was translucent, like ice, and Boyd could see things moving underneath it. Lights, like bioluminescent fish in deep water. His eyes were gone, replaced by swirling vortexes of aurora light. Time to go, Boyd. Your truck is waiting. Boyd swung the bat, but it passed right through Arlo's form like he was made of mist. The thing that looked like Arlo smiled, its mouth opening wider than any human mouth should, revealing rows of needle-sharp ice crystals instead of teeth. Physical resistance. How quaint. How human. You still don't understand what you're becoming, do you? Boyd ran to his bedroom, slamming the door behind him. He pushed his dresser against it, knowing it wouldn't hold for long. His window was frozen shut, but he grabbed a chair and smashed through the glass. The storm immediately howled into the room, bringing with it a cold so intense it felt like being stabbed with 1,000 needles. 3 stories down. He might survive the fall, might not, but it was better than whatever they had planned for him. Boyd climbed onto the windowsill, ready to jump, when he saw what was waiting below. The parking lot was full of trucks, dozens of semi-trucks, all idling, all empty. Their headlights were on, but the light was wrong, that same cold luminescence. They were arranged in a pattern, a symbol that hurt to look at, that seemed to twist space around it. Standing between the trucks were the drivers. Boyd recognized some of them, men and women who had gone missing over the years, their faces on missing posters at truck stops across Alaska. They all looked up at him with those aurora eyes, their mouths moving in unison. Jump, Boyd, join us. It's easier if you come willingly. Boyd pulled back from the window. His dresser exploded inward, reduced to splinters. The Arlo thing flowed into the room like liquid darkness, bringing with it 5 others. They surrounded Boyd, not touching him, just standing there, waiting. Last chance, Boyd. Walk out on your own, or we carry you. Either way, you're coming. Boyd felt something inside him responding to their presence. The marks on his skin were burning now, but it wasn't pain. It was something else, something that felt almost like coming home. His vision was starting to change, the dark room becoming bright with new spectrums of light he'd never been able to see before. That's it, the Arlo thing said. Let it happen. Stop fighting what you are. Boyd's legs moved without his permission, carrying him toward the door. He tried to resist, but his body wasn't listening anymore. The marks had spread too far, taken too much control. He walked through his destroyed apartment, down the dark stairs, out into the storm. The cold didn't hurt anymore. It felt natural, right? The assembled drivers parted to let him through, and Boyd found himself walking toward one specific truck. It was his old Peterbilt, the one that had broken down on the highway. But it looked different now. The metal seemed to pulse with organic life, and the exhaust was breathing out clouds that formed shapes in the air, messages in no human language. Boyd climbed into the driver's seat. The keys were in the ignition, the engine already running. His hands moved to the steering wheel, and he felt the truck respond not to mechanical control, but to thought. It was alive, or something close to it. North, the voices said in unison. Drive north, to the end of all roads. Boyd put the truck in gear and pulled out of the parking lot. The other trucks followed, forming a convoy of the marked. They drove through the empty streets of Fairbanks, through the storm that seemed to part for them, onto the Dalton Highway. The speedometer showed impossible speeds, but the landscape outside seemed to be moving slowly, dreamlike. The aurora borealis descended from the sky, surrounding the convoy in curtains of green and blue light. Within that light, Boyd could see them clearly now. The old ones. They were vast, incomprehensible. Not solid, not gas, something in between. They moved through the air like jellyfish through water, trailing tentacles of light that connected to each of the marked drivers. Boyd felt one attached to him, sliding into his brain with a cold that was beyond temperature. Memories that weren't his flooded his mind. The time before the ice, when the world was warm and they ruled over continents. The coming of the cold, driving them north, trapping them. The long sleep under the permafrost. The first human roads cutting through their territory, bringing fresh warmth to feed on. The plan, centuries in the making, to use the marked ones to expand south again. Boyd tried to scream, but the sound that came out wasn't human. It was the sound the wind makes through ice caves, the sound of glaciers cracking, the sound of absolute zero. Mile marker 238 approached, the exact spot where it had all started. But now Boyd could see that there had never been an abandoned truck. It had all been bait, an illusion crafted from his expectations and fears. The real trap had been his own compassion, his trucker's code to always stop and help. The convoy stopped at 238. Beyond this point, the road changed. It was still asphalt and yellow lines to normal eyes, but Boyd could see what it really was now. A tongue, black and twisted, leading into a mouth of impossible size. The road to the cold dark, just as Mavis had said. One by one, the trucks drove into that mouth, disappearing into something that wasn't quite darkness, wasn't quite light. Boyd's truck moved forward, last in line. He fought for control one final time, managing to turn his head to look back at the world he was leaving. Far in the distance, barely visible through the storm, he could see headlights. Real headlights. Another trucker driving north through the blizzard, probably running behind schedule, pushing through dangerous conditions to make a delivery deadline. Boyd tried to warn them, tried to flash his lights, honk his horn, anything, but his truck was no longer under any kind of human control. It rolled forward into the waiting mouth, and Boyd felt reality tear around him. He was in two places at once. Still in his truck, driving through a landscape that couldn't exist, where the northern lights were solid things that scraped against his windshield. But also somewhere else, floating in a void filled with billions of points of light, each one a life, a source of warmth. The old ones were showing him what was coming. When they had enough marked ones, they would trace the pattern. The roads would become conduits, channels for them to flow south. Every truck stop, every city connected to the highway system would become a feeding ground. But first, the voices said, we need more. More drivers, more marks, more beacons. Boyd understood now. He wasn't going to be consumed. He was going to be used. Sent back out to the highway to wait in a truck that looked abandoned, to play the part of someone who needed help, to mark the next compassionate soul who stopped to check on him. The truck emerged from the mouth, but not where it had entered. Boyd was back at mile marker 238, his Peterbilt parked at that same odd angle across both lanes. No emergency flashers, no flares. The keys in the ignition, a logbook with his name on the passenger seat and blood, his blood, though he felt no wound, on the driver's seat. Boyd tried to move, but his body was frozen, not with cold but with the paralysis of the marked. He could only wait, watching through eyes that no longer belonged to him as the storm began to clear. Hours passed, or days. Time worked differently when you were caught between states of being. Finally, headlights appeared in the distance, a truck approaching, slowing down. Inside Boyd's mind, he screamed warnings. Run, don't stop, drive past, and don't look back. But his mouth opened on its own, and his voice, broadcast through frequencies only the marked could generate, spoke words he didn't choose. Help. Please. Somebody help me. The truck stopped 50 feet away. The driver got out, bundled in a heavy parka, approaching carefully. Boyd recognized the walk, the cautious concern of a fellow trucker who'd found something wrong on the ice road. The driver climbed up to look in Boyd's window. It was a woman, young, maybe 5 years into her career. Her eyes were kind, worried. Sir? Sir, are you okay? Boyd's hand moved, reaching for the door handle. His mouth smiled, though inside he was screaming. Thank God you stopped, he heard himself say. I think I'm hurt. There's something wrong with my truck. Can you help me? She opened the door, leaning in to help him. The moment her hand touched his, Boyd felt the mark transfer. Invisible. Insidious. She jerked back, confused, rubbing her hand. Your skin is like ice, she said. Sorry. Been sitting here a while. The heater's broken. She looked around, noticing there were no flares, no emergency markers. Smart. She was already suspicious, but not suspicious enough to leave immediately. Where's your phone? We should call for help. Tried. No signal. Storm must have knocked out the towers. She pulled out her own phone, frowning at the screen. Boyd knew what she was seeing. The same dead signal he'd encountered. The old ones could do that. Create dead zones where they hunted. I'll radio for help from my truck, she said, already backing away. But Boyd knew she wouldn't get help. The mark was already working on her, though she didn't know it yet. In a few hours, she'd start hearing the voices. In a few days, she'd see the lights. And eventually, when the next big storm came, she'd be drawn back here. She returned to her truck and drove away, carefully navigating around his supposedly broken-down rig. Boyd wanted to feel relief that she'd escaped, but he knew better. Nobody escaped. The marks always brought them back. Time lost all meaning for Boyd after that first encounter. He existed in a state between consciousness and dream, watching through his own eyes as trucker after trucker stopped to help him. Each time, his body performed the same routine, the weak cry for help, the grateful smile, the icy touch that passed the mark. He'd lost count of how many he'd infected. Dozens, maybe more. Sometimes he was allowed to move. The old ones would release their hold just enough for him to relocate his truck to a different spot on the highway. Mile marker 156. Mile marker 289. Mile marker 371. Always during the worst storms when visibility was zero and desperate drivers would be looking for any sign of human life in the white void. During these brief moments of mobility, Boyd would try to resist. He'd fight to drive his truck off a cliff, into a river, anything to end this nightmare. But his body wouldn't obey. The marks had spread through his entire nervous system now, a network of frozen neurons that responded only to them. The worst part was the growing awareness. As more truckers were marked, Boyd could feel them all, an expanding web of consciousness connected by those alien parasites. He knew their names, their memories, their mounting horror as they realized what they'd become. Tom Henley really was there, had been there all along, just another node in the network. Sam Morrison, too, and Jim Garrett, and dozens of others whose names had been forgotten by everyone except their fellow damned. 3 months had passed since Boyd's marking, though he only knew this from the fragments of conversation he overheard from the truckers who stopped. March had arrived. bringing with it the last of the winter storms. The old ones were growing stronger with each marked soul, their influence spreading beyond the Dalton Highway to other ice roads across Alaska. Tonight was different, though. Boyd could feel it in the way the old ones moved through the storm, agitated, eager. Something big was happening. The pattern they'd been building was almost complete. Boyd's truck was positioned at mile marker 238 again, the place where it had all started. But this time, he wasn't alone. Dozens of trucks were scattered along this stretch of highway, all positioned to look like accidents, breakdowns, vehicles in distress. The biggest trap yet. A convoy was coming. Boyd could hear their radio chatter through the receivers the old ones had grown inside his skull. 15 trucks, all from the same company, making an emergency supply run to Prudhoe Bay. Some kind of critical equipment failure at the oil fields. Every available driver had been called in, promised triple pay for making the dangerous journey through the storm. They had no idea they were driving into an ambush. The lead truck appeared through the blizzard, its headlights catching Boyd's abandoned-looking rig. The driver's voice crackled over the CB. "Jesus Christ, we got vehicles all over the road up here. Looks like a massive pile-up." "Should we stop?" another driver asked. "We have to check for survivors. Company protocol." They all stopped. 15 trucks, 30 drivers between the main drivers and relief drivers. They spread out among the abandoned vehicles, checking each one, calling out for survivors. Boyd watched through eyes he couldn't close as they approached his truck. But something was wrong. The driver who climbed up to Boyd's window wasn't wearing standard trucker gear. He had on military-style tactical clothing, and there was a strange device on his belt that Boyd didn't recognize. When the man looked through the window, his eyes were protected by special goggles that gleamed with an anti-aurora coating. "I've got another one here," the man said into a radio. "Marked Stage 4 by the looks of it." Boyd tried to speak, to warn, to beg, but no sound came out. The old ones had gone silent, their presence retreating like tide pulling back before a tsunami. More tactical-dressed figures emerged from the convoy trucks. They moved with military precision, surrounding each of the bait vehicles. One of them, a woman with sergeant's stripes, approached Boyd's truck. "Boyd Axelrod," she said, reading from a device. "Missing for 3 months. Family thought you were dead." She looked up at him through those protected goggles. "You're going to be okay. We're here to help." They pulled Boyd from the truck, his frozen body unable to resist, even if the old ones had been controlling it. As they carried him toward one of their vehicles, Boyd saw similar scenes playing out across the highway. All the marked truckers were being extracted, loaded into specialized containers that hummed with electromagnetic fields. The woman, who identified herself as Sergeant Fuller, stayed with Boyd as they loaded him. "I know you can hear me," she said. "You're probably wondering who we are. Let's just say the government has known about these things for a long time. The Inupiaq weren't the only ones keeping records. We've been developing countermeasures." She held up a device that looked like a modified medical scanner. "Electromagnetic pulse, calibrated to the specific frequency these things use to control neural tissue. Hurts like hell, but it burns them out of your system. Most of your system anyway. You'll never be completely free, but you'll be yourself again." Boyd wanted to warn her about the old ones, about how vast and powerful they were. But then he felt it. Terror, alien and immense, flooding through the network. The old ones were afraid. For the first time in eons, they were afraid. "That's right," Sergeant Fuller said, as if reading his thoughts. "We found their physical forms. Took us years, but we tracked them to caves under the permafrost. Turns out they're not as incorporeal as they want us to think. They have bodies, ancient things, frozen in the ice, and frozen things can be burned." An explosion lit up the northern horizon, visible even through the blizzard. then another, then a dozen more, synchronized strikes at locations across the Arctic. Boyd felt the network scream, a psychic shriek that should have destroyed his mind. But the electromagnetic field around him dampened it, reduced it to merely agonizing rather than lethal. The old ones retreated, pulling back from their marked victims like parasites abandoning a sinking ship, but they had nowhere to go. Their physical forms were burning, destroyed by incendiary weapons designed specifically to burn at temperatures that could melt permafrost. The psychic network collapsed, leaving Boyd gasping and trembling in control of his own body for the first time in months. "We've been planning this for years," Sergeant Fuller explained, as medics began checking Boyd's vitals. "Every time someone disappeared on the ice roads, we documented it, built a pattern, found their feeding grounds, their anchor points. The marked truckers were the final piece of the puzzle. You led us right to them." Boyd's voice was barely a whisper when he finally spoke. "There are more. Other places. Other roads. We know. Teams are hitting sites across Alaska, northern Canada, Siberia. Anywhere the ice roads run, it's a global operation." They transported Boyd and the other rescued truckers to a military facility outside Anchorage. The treatment was exactly as painful as Sergeant Fuller had warned. Electromagnetic pulses coursed through Boyd's body for hours, burning out the alien neural pathways. He could feel pieces of the old ones dying inside him, shriveling like salted slugs. But she had been right about one thing. They couldn't get all of it. Even after the treatment, Boyd could still see lights in the aurora that shouldn't be there, could still hear whispers when the temperature dropped below freezing. The marks on his skin faded, but never fully disappeared, leaving faint scars that ached when storms approached. The military debriefed him for weeks, extracting every detail about his experience. They showed him satellite footage of the strikes, heat blooms in the permafrost where things that had lived since before human memory were finally destroyed. They told him the cover story: gas line explosions, routine military exercises, nothing for the public to worry about. Boyd was released in late April, just as the last of the snow was melting. His CDL was reinstated, his record cleared. The company offered him his job back with a significant raise, citing hardship compensation for his accident-related trauma. They had no idea how close to the truth that was. But Boyd couldn't go back to trucking. The thought of being alone in a cab, driving through darkness, made him break out in cold sweats. He took a job at a truck stop in Fairbanks instead, pumping gas and serving coffee to drivers who had no idea how close they'd come to becoming prey. Sometimes, late at night when the northern lights danced across the sky, Boyd would see shadows moving in the patterns. Remnants of the old ones, perhaps. Or new things drawn to the vacuum left by their destruction. He'd been told the threat was eliminated, but Boyd knew better. Alaska was too vast, too wild, too cold. There would always be things in the ice that shouldn't exist. Arlo Finch stopped by the truck stop one evening in May. The real Arlo, not the thing that had worn his shape. He didn't remember picking Boyd up that night in the storm, had no memory of driving him to Fairbanks. The military had filled in the gaps with false memories, for his own protection, they said. "Heard you had quite the ordeal," Arlo said, paying for his coffee. "Getting lost in that blizzard, walking 5 miles to safety. Lucky to be alive." "Yeah," Boyd agreed, "lucky." As Arlo walked back to his truck, Boyd noticed him pause and look at the northern lights, which were particularly active that night. For just a moment, Arlo's hand went to his neck, touching a spot where Boyd could see the faintest trace of a mark that looked fresh. Boyd started to call out, to warn him, but stopped. What could he say that wouldn't sound insane? That the old ones weren't all gone? That the military had missed some? That the marks were spreading again, more subtle this time, more careful. Instead, he watched Arlo drive away, heading north on the Dalton Highway. Boyd made a note of the date and time. In a few weeks, maybe a month, Arlo would start hearing the voices, start seeing the lights. And then when the first winter storm came, Boyd picked up his phone and scrolled to a contact labeled simply, Sergeant Fuller, emergency only. His thumb hovered over the call button, but before he could decide, his phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. He answered it against his better judgment. Hello, Boyd. The voice was impossible, something that should have been destroyed in those incendiary strikes. It was older, weaker, but unmistakably one of them. You thought you won. Your kind always thinks you win, but we are the cold itself, and cold always returns. You're supposed to be dead. Death is a concept for things that were born. We were never born, Boyd. We simply are. Your military destroyed our oldest forms, yes, the ones we wore for millions of years. But we can grow new ones, smaller, weaker, but sufficient. And we've learned so much from our time in your mines. Boyd's hand trembled. What do you want? The same thing we always wanted. Warmth. Life. But now we know not to be greedy, not to take too many at once. We'll be more careful, more selective. One trucker here, one there, spread across years instead of months. Your military won't notice patterns that don't exist. I'll stop you. With what? Who would believe you? You're just a traumatized ex-trucker who had a mental breakdown on the ice. That's what your files say. That's what everyone believes. Even Sergeant Fuller thinks the threat is over. The line went dead. Boyd stood there in the fluorescent light of the truck stop, watching the ice roads stretch into the darkness. Trucks came and went, their drivers oblivious to the danger that still lurked in the cold. He thought about calling Sergeant Fuller, about trying to convince her to investigate again. But the voice had been right. Without evidence, without patterns, who would believe him? He was just another casualty of the ice roads, another driver who'd cracked under the isolation and cold. A young trucker, probably fresh out of driving school, approached the counter. Heading up to Prudhoe, he said, paying for fuel. First time driving the Dalton at night. Any advice? Boyd looked at him, so young and eager, so unaware of what waited in the darkness. Stay on the road, he said finally. Don't stop for anything. And if you see lights where there shouldn't be lights, yeah, just keep driving. The young trucker laughed. You old-timers and your stories, I'll be fine. Boyd watched him leave, watched his truck disappear into the night. Above, the aurora borealis twisted and writhed, and for just a moment, Boyd could swear he saw faces in the light, watching, waiting, patient as the ice itself. He looked down at his scarred hands, at the marks that would never fully fade. They ached, a deep cold ache that had nothing to do with temperature. The old ones had left something inside him, something that could never be fully removed. He was connected to them now, whether he wanted to be or not. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him more than any Arctic wind, that they would be back. Maybe not this winter, maybe not the next, but eventually, when humanity had forgotten to be vigilant, when the story of the marked truckers had faded into legend, they would return. Boyd went back to wiping down the counter, serving coffee, pumping gas, playing the part of a normal person who had survived a normal disaster, but always watching, always listening, always waiting for the next phone call with an unknown number and a local area code. Outside, the ice roads stretched into infinity, and somewhere in that frozen darkness, something ancient and patient smiled with mouths that weren't quite mouths. The game wasn't over. It had just entered a new phase, and Boyd Axelrod, marked and scarred, standing guard at a lonely truck stop at the edge of civilization, was the only one who knew it. The northern lights pulsed once, bright and wrong, and then went dark. In the distance, barely audible over the rumble of diesel engines, came the sound of breaking ice, something moving under the permafrost, something vast and cold and endlessly hungry. Boyd reached for his phone again, then stopped. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow, he would try to warn them. Tonight, he would stand watch as he did every night, knowing that somewhere out there in the white void, the old ones were learning, adapting, preparing. The war wasn't over. It had barely begun. And on the Dalton Highway, in the depths of an Arctic winter that would never truly end, the lights began to dance once more. The Richardson Highway stretched before Merle Taggart like a frozen serpent, winding through the Chugach Mountains in the pale February dawn. Minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit, according to his dashboard thermometer, and dropping. 22 years of hauling freight through Alaska's worst terrain, and Merle still felt his jaw clench when he entered avalanche country during the unstable season. His freightliner, Cascadia, pulled 48,000 pounds of construction materials destined for Valdez, a load that would help rebuild the port facilities damaged in last month's storm. The company had promised a hefty bonus for early delivery, which was why Merle was driving through Thompson Pass at the worst possible time, right after a heavy snowfall, with temperatures rising just enough to destabilize the snowpack before dropping again. The CB radio crackled with sporadic chatter from other truckers spread out along the highway. Most were discussing the weather, the road conditions, the usual complaints about dispatch pushing them too hard. Merle kept his radio on, but rarely contributed. He preferred to focus on the road, especially through this stretch where the mountains pressed close on both sides, their peaks lost in low-hanging clouds heavy with more snow. Mile marker 42 appeared through the light snowfall. Another 10 miles of avalanche zones before the road opened up again. Merle had driven this route hundreds of times, knew every curve, every danger spot, every place where the snow liked to let loose and bury everything in its path. The Department of Transportation did their best with controlled explosions and barriers, but nature always had the final say in Alaska. A voice cut through the radio static, clearer than the others. Northbound haulers. This is Leland Voss in the Black Peterbilt. Anyone else notice that crack running across the slope at marker 44? Looks fresh. Merle grabbed his handset. He didn't know Leland personally, but the name was familiar. An independent operator out of Anchorage with a reputation for being overcautious. Some of the younger drivers mocked him for it, but Merle knew that the cautious ones were the ones who lived to retire. This is Merle Taggart, northbound in the Freightliner. Haven't hit 44 yet. How bad does it look? Bad enough that I'm thinking about turning back. That whole mountainside looks ready to come down. We had that warm snap yesterday. Now it's freezing again. That's avalanche weather if I ever saw it. Another voice joined in, younger, cockier. You boys worry too much. DOT cleared the road this morning. I'm running behind schedule as it is. Merle recognized that attitude. He'd had it himself once, before he'd seen his first avalanche victim. The memory still haunted him. A Toyota pickup completely crushed, the driver's arm sticking out of the compacted snow, still wearing his watch, still showing the exact time the mountain had fallen on him. Your funeral, Junior, Leland responded. I'm pulling over to wait it out. That slope doesn't look right. Merle considered his options. He could pull over too, wait for conditions to improve, or for DOT to do another control blast. But every hour of delay cost money, and his wife Sarah was already worried about making their mortgage payment this month. The fishing boat he'd invested in last year had been nothing but a money pit, and they needed every cent he could earn. He kept driving. Mile marker 43 came and went. The snowfall was getting heavier, reducing visibility to maybe 100 feet. Merle slowed to 30 miles per hour, his hands tight on the wheel. The road curved to the left here, following the contour of the mountain. To his right, the ground dropped away into a valley filled with morning mist. To his left, the mountain rose at a 70-degree angle, thousands of tons of snow held in place by nothing more than temperature and friction. The radio crackled again. "This is DOT dispatch with an emergency bulletin. All traffic on Richardson Highway between markers 40 and 50 is advised to seek immediate shelter. Avalanche warning level has been raised to extreme. Repeat, avalanche warning level extreme." Merle's blood chilled. He was at marker 43.5, right in the middle of the danger zone. There was a pull-off at marker 45, a reinforced area designed to offer some protection from slides. If he could make it there. The mountain answered before he could finish the thought. It started as a crack, sharp as a gunshot, echoing off the valley walls. Merle looked up through his side window and saw it. A line appearing across the snowfield 500 feet above the road, spreading like a crack in glass. Then the whole mountainside started to move. Time slowed. Merle had maybe 10 seconds before the avalanche reached the road. His training kicked in. Don't try to outrun it. You can't. Don't stop in its path. You'll be buried. Find a gap, an angle, something to put between you and the snow. He floored it. The Freightliner's engine roaring as he pushed toward a rocky outcropping ahead that might deflect the worst of the slide. In his mirrors, he saw the avalanche hit the road behind him, a white wall of destruction that swallowed everything. The Toyota pickup that had been following him disappeared instantly, consumed by the mountain's fury. The shockwave hit first, a blast of air that rocked his truck sideways. Then came the snow. Not the soft powder of normal snowfall, but a concrete hard wave of compressed ice and debris. It slammed into his trailer, lifting the rear wheels off the ground. Merle fought the steering wheel, trying to keep the truck straight as it was pushed sideways across the road. The rocky outcropping he'd been aiming for took the brunt of the impact, splitting the avalanche like a ship's prow splits water. Snow exploded over his cab, covering the windshield completely, turning day to night in an instant. The truck lurched to a stop, tilted at a dangerous angle but still upright. Then silence. The kind of absolute silence that only exists after catastrophic violence, when even the mountains seem to hold their breath. Merle sat frozen, his hands still death-gripped on the wheel. He was alive. Somehow, impossibly, he was alive. But as his eyes adjusted to the darkness inside his snow-covered cab, he realized his situation was far from safe. The avalanche had pushed his truck to the very edge of the road. Through his passenger window, which was miraculously still clear, he could see nothing but empty space where the ground should be. His trailer was twisted at an unnatural angle, and he could hear the metal groaning under the stress. One wrong move, one shift in weight, and the whole rig would go over the edge. He reached carefully for his CB radio, trying not to shift his weight. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Merle Taggart. I've been hit by an avalanche at mile marker 44. Truck is partially buried and unstable. Does anyone copy?" Static. Then, faintly, Leland Voss's voice. "Merle? Jesus Christ, we thought you were gone. The whole mountain came down. Are you hurt?" "Not hurt, but I'm hanging half off the cliff. The trailer's twisted. Might go over any second." "Hang tight. I'm calling emergency services. DOT and rescue are already responding to the slide." Merle could hear other voices on the radio now. Truckers who had been caught on both sides of the avalanche zone. The slide had completely blocked the highway, trapping at least a dozen vehicles. But from what he could gather, his truck was the only one actually hit by the main flow. "Merle, this is Opal Briggs from State Trooper Dispatch." A calm, female voice came through the radio. "Rescue teams are en route, but it's going to take time. The slide is massive, almost a quarter mile of road covered. Can you exit your vehicle safely?" Merle looked around, assessing. The driver's door was buried in snow, pressed tight against the cab. The passenger door opened onto a 200-foot drop. The windshield was covered but not broken. Maybe if he could break it out. That's when he heard it. Another crack from above. The avalanche had destabilized the entire slope. Secondary slides were coming. "Negative on exit," Merle responded. "And we've got more coming down. I can hear it breaking loose." Sure enough, seconds later another rumble filled the air. Not as big as the first slide, but big enough. More snow poured down, piling higher against his already buried truck. The cab groaned and tilted another few degrees toward the cliff. "All units, be advised." Opal's voice came back, tighter now. "We're reading multiple instabilities on the slope. Rescue teams are being held back until we can assess the danger." Merle laughed bitterly. Held back? Of course. No one was going to risk their lives for one trucker who'd been stupid enough to ignore the warnings. He was on his own. The radio crackled with another transmission. "Taggart, you still there? This is Leland Voss. I'm parked about a half-mile south of the slide zone. Listen, I've got rope, emergency gear. I could try to make it on foot, come at you from below." "Negative," Opal cut in immediately. "Mr. Voss, do not attempt a rescue. The slope is too unstable. With all due respect, dispatch, Merle's going to die if someone doesn't do something. That truck won't hold forever." Merle felt a surge of hope mixed with guilt. He didn't know Leland, had no right to expect him to risk his life. "Leland, don't. It's too dangerous." "Shut up, Merle. I'm not leaving you there. Give me 20 minutes. But they didn't have 20 minutes. Merle could feel his truck shifting, inch by inch, toward the drop. The weight of the snow on the trailer was pulling everything backward. He tried to calculate how long before the center of gravity shifted past the point of no return. 10 minutes? 5? He keyed the radio again. "Anyone northbound past the slide zone? I need someone to anchor my truck from the front. A winch line, anything. This is Jerry Morrison, northbound at marker 46. I'm past the slide, but the road's buried. I'd have to dig through 30 feet of snow to get to you." More voices joined in, truckers offering suggestions, prayers, encouragement. But Merle knew the truth. He was going to die here, balanced on the edge of a cliff in a tin can filled with construction materials. Sarah would get the life insurance at least. The mortgage would be paid. A new sound cut through his morbid thoughts. An engine, close by on his side of the avalanche. But that was impossible. The road was buried. Through his passenger window, Merle saw something that made no sense. A truck was driving along the mountainside, parallel to the road but 50 feet up the slope, somehow finding purchase on the angled, snow-covered terrain. It was a modified Kenworth with massive off-road tires and what looked like tank treads attached to the rear axles. The truck stopped directly upslope from Merle's position. The driver got out, a man in full avalanche gear with a face Merle couldn't see through the helmet and goggles. The figure rappelled down the slope with practiced ease, carrying what looked like industrial-grade tow cables. "Who the hell are you?" Merle called out through his window. The man didn't answer, just went to work. He attached the cables to Merle's front axle with quick, efficient movements, then climbed back up to his impossible truck. The winch engaged, and Merle felt his truck being pulled forward, away from the cliff edge. It should have been a relief, but something was wrong. The man hadn't spoken, hadn't even acknowledged Merle beyond the mechanical process of rigging the cables. And that truck, Merle had been driving these roads for over 2 decades and had never seen anything like it. The radio exploded with voices. "What's happening? Merle, is someone there? We're seeing movement on the thermal cameras, but it doesn't make sense." Before Merle could respond, his truck lurched. Not forward, as he'd expected, but sideways. The mysterious Kenworth was dragging him parallel to the road, up the slope. It was impossible. No truck had that kind of power, that kind of traction. "Stop!" Merle shouted. "What are you doing?" But the dragging continued. His freightliner was being pulled up the mountainside like a toy, leaving deep grooves in the snow. Through his mirrors, Merle could see the road falling away below. If the cables snapped now, he wouldn't just go off the cliff. He'd roll all the way down to the valley floor. The radio was going crazy. Opal's voice cut through. "Merle, we're tracking your GPS. You're moving up the mountain. What's happening?" "I don't know. Someone's pulling me up. There's a truck up here, some kind of modified Kenworth. The driver won't talk to me." "That's impossible. Our thermal imaging shows no vehicles in that area except yours." Merle's blood ran cold. He looked up at the truck pulling him. It was there, solid as anything, its engine roaring with effort. But if the thermal cameras couldn't see it... Another crack from above. This time, the entire upper slope began to move. Not just a section, but everything above them, a massive shelf of snow breaking free. The mysterious driver seemed to have anticipated this. The Kenworth accelerated, dragging Merle's truck faster up the slope. They were racing the avalanche now, trying to get above it before it swept them both away. Merle could only hang on, helpless, as his truck was hauled up the impossible incline. The physics didn't work. The angle was too steep. The snow should have given way under their combined weight. But somehow they kept climbing. The avalanche roared past below them, a white tsunami that would have killed Merle instantly if he'd still been on the road. It hit with such force that the ground shook, and for a moment Merle thought they might be swept away, despite their elevation. But the cables held, and the mysterious Kenworth kept climbing. They crested a ridge, and suddenly Merle could see the other side of the mountain. There was a flat area here, a natural shelf hidden from below, and on that shelf sat 3 more trucks, all modified like the Kenworth, all with those impossible tread and tire combinations. The Kenworth dragged Merle's truck onto the shelf and stopped. The driver got out again, walked back to Merle's cab, and for the first time removed his helmet. The face underneath was scarred, weathered, with eyes that had seen too much. But it was a face Merle recognized from old photos at truck stops, from memorial walls, from missing persons posts. It was Dave Henning, a trucker who had supposedly died in an avalanche on this very pass 5 years ago. "Hello, Merle," Dave said, his voice rough from disuse. "Welcome to the graveyard." Merle's mouth worked soundlessly. This couldn't be real. Dave Henning was dead. They'd found pieces of his truck scattered across the valley. His family had held a funeral. You're dead," Merle finally managed. Dave smiled, but there was no humor in it. "The mountain took me, yes, but it didn't kill me, just like it didn't kill them." He gestured to the other trucks, and Merle saw figures emerging from them. More drivers, all men and women who had supposedly died in avalanches over the years. "We don't leave our own behind," Dave continued. "When the mountain takes someone, we try to save them. Sometimes we're too late. Sometimes the cold gets them or the impact. But sometimes, like with you, we get there in time." "This is insane. Why don't you go back? Why doesn't anyone know you're alive?" Dave's expression darkened. "Look at your radio, Merle. Look at your phone. Any signal?" Merle checked. Everything was dead. Not just no signal, completely dead, like the electronics had been fried. "The mountain doesn't let us leave," Dave explained. "Oh, we can move around up here, travel the high paths that normal trucks can't reach. But the moment we try to descend to the roads, to civilization, the mountain takes us back. Always in an avalanche. Always violently. That's not possible." Mountains aren't alive. They don't make decisions. This one does. This came from one of the other drivers, a woman Merle vaguely recognized as Patricia Colson, missing since 2019. We've all tried to leave. Every time, the mountain brings us back, so we stop trying. Now we just watch for others like us, others who get caught. We save who we can. Merle's rational mind rebelled against everything he was hearing, but the evidence was right in front of him. These people, these trucks, this impossible rescue, it was all real. There are 12 of us now, Dave said. 13 with you. We've built a life up here. It's not the life we wanted, but it's life. There are caves for shelter, natural hot springs for warmth. We've even managed to grow some food in the volcanic soil. And every time a truck gets hit by an avalanche, we try to save them. My family, Merle said. My wife. She thinks I'm dead by now. Not yet. The rescue teams will search for days. They'll find your truck eventually empty. They'll assume you were swept away, body never recovered. It's what always happens. No, Merle stood up, anger replacing shock. No, I'm not staying here. I have a life. I have responsibilities. Dave stepped back, his expression sad but understanding. You think we didn't say the same thing? You think Patricia didn't have 2 kids waiting for her? You think I didn't have a father dying of cancer who needed me? We all had lives, Merle. The mountain took them. Then we fight back. We find a way down. You're welcome to try. We all did at first. But let me show you something. Dave led Merle to the edge of the shelf, where they could look down at the highway. The avalanche had subsided, and rescue vehicles were arriving, their lights flashing in the growing dusk. Merle could see tiny figures setting up equipment, beginning the search. Watch, Dave said. He picked up a rock and threw it down toward the road. The moment it passed a certain point, maybe 30 feet below the shelf, the snow around it erupted. Not an avalanche, but something targeted, specific. The rock was swallowed instantly. It's like a barrier, Dave explained. We can go up, we can go sideways, but we can't go down past that line. The mountain won't allow it. Merle grabbed his CB radio, tried to transmit. Nothing. His satellite phone, his cell phone, all dead. Even his emergency beacon, which should have worked regardless of conditions, was silent. The mountain generates some kind of field, Patricia said, joining them. Electromagnetic, maybe, or something we don't have a word for. It kills all signals, all electronics, unless they're modified like our trucks. Took us months to figure out how to shield them. This is kidnapping. This is imprisonment. This is survival, Dave corrected. The mountain made a choice, Merle. It chose you. Fighting it will only get you killed. As if to emphasize his point, the mountain rumbled. Not another avalanche, but something deeper, like it was shifting in its sleep. Merle felt it through his boots, a vibration that seemed almost alive. I've been here 5 years, Dave said. In that time, I've seen 7 people try to escape. Really try, with ropes and climbing gear and determination. The mountain killed them all. Not quickly, not mercifully. It played with them first. Trapped them in ice caves, buried them just enough to suffocate slowly, dropped them into crevasses that appeared from nowhere. The mountain has rules, Merle. Follow them and you live. Break them and you die. Merle looked out at the rescue teams below. So close, yet unreachable. He could see Leland Voss's truck among the gathered vehicles. The man probably wondering what had happened to the trucker he'd tried to save. His radio, dead moments ago, suddenly crackled to life. But the voice that came through wasn't human. It was wind through ice caves, snow settling on graves, the sound a mountain might make if mountains could speak. You are mine now. You will serve as the others serve. You will save those who can be saved. This is your purpose. This is your path." The radio died again, but the message was clear. Merle Taggart, veteran, trucker, husband, debtor, was gone. In his place was another ghost of Thompson Pass, another guardian of the high places, another servant of the living mountain. But Merle wasn't ready to accept that. Not yet. The first week was the hardest. Merle spent every waking hour testing the boundaries of his prison, looking for weaknesses in whatever force held them on the mountain. He tried everything, climbing down at different angles, using various materials to shield himself, even attempting to dig a tunnel through the snow. Each time, the mountain responded with increasing violence. On his third escape attempt, using rope he'd fashioned from cargo straps, the mountain had created a whiteout so intense he couldn't see his own hands. He'd nearly frozen to death before Dave and the others pulled him back to safety. On his fifth attempt, the ground had literally opened beneath him, a crevasse appearing from nowhere. Only Patricia's quick reflexes with a rescue rope had saved him from falling into the blue-black depths. The community of the trapped existed in a series of connected caves about 200 feet above the road. Dave hadn't been exaggerating about the hot springs. Geothermal vents created pockets of warmth throughout the cave system, making survival possible. They'd even managed to tap into an underground stream for fresh water. It was primitive but functional, like a frontier settlement that happened to be prison. The other trapped truckers had established a routine. They took turns monitoring the road below, watching for accidents, for slides, for anyone who might need help. They maintained their modified trucks, keeping them ready for rescue operations. They shared meals cooked over volcanic vents, told stories of the lives they'd lost, and tried not to go insane from the isolation. Merle learned their names, their histories. Besides Dave Henning and Patricia Colson, there was Marcus Webb, taken by the mountain in 2016. Janet Rodriguez, 2018. Bill Chen, just last year. 7 others, dating back to '98. An old-timer named Frank Morrison who'd been here so long he barely remembered his life before. "The mountain's been taking people longer than that," Frank told Merle one evening, as they sat by a thermal vent, the heat making the cave almost comfortable. The natives knew about it. They had stories. This pass was sacred to them, or cursed, depending on how you translate it. They never built permanent settlements here, never stayed longer than necessary. "Then why did we build a highway through it?" Merle asked. Frank shrugged. "Same reason we always do. It was the shortest route, the most economical. We thought we could conquer nature with asphalt and engineering. The mountain had other ideas." Merle's Freightliner had been thoroughly destroyed in the rescue, but the construction materials in his trailer were salvageable. The community used everything: metal for reinforcing cave entrances, insulation for warmth, tools for daily survival. Nothing was wasted. They couldn't afford to waste anything. The modified trucks were marvels of desperate engineering. Over the years, the trapped truckers had cannibalized parts from destroyed vehicles, creating hybrid machines that could traverse the impossible terrain of the mountain's upper reaches. The treads were fashioned from mining equipment that had been abandoned in the pass decades ago. The engines were modified to run on a mixture of diesel and rendered animal fat from the mountain goats they occasionally hunted. "We're not the only things living up here," Patricia explained as she showed Merle around their makeshift garage. "There's wildlife that's adapted to the mountain's strangeness. Goats that can walk on vertical ice, ravens that fly in perfect silence, and other things. Things we don't talk about." "What kind of things?" Patricia's expression darkened. "You'll see eventually. The mountain has moods. Sometimes it sends them to test us, or punish us, or maybe just to remind us who's in charge." Merle didn't have to wait long to understand what she meant. 3 weeks into his captivity during a particularly violent storm, something visited their caves. He woke to the sound of screaming. Not human screaming, but something that might have been human once. The trapped truckers gathered at the cave entrance, weapons in hand. Makeshift spears, flare guns, anything that might provide defense. Outside, illuminated by lightning, Merle saw his first mountain spirit. It had been a person once, that much was clear from the basic shape. But the mountain had changed it, stretched it, made it into something that could survive in the thin air and brutal cold of the high places. Its limbs were too long, its fingers ended in ice claws, and its face was the worst part. Still human enough to recognize the suffering in its expression. "That's Tom Yates," Dave said quietly. "He tried to escape 2 years ago. Really tried. Dug a tunnel for 3 months without telling anyone. Made it almost all the way to the road before the mountain caught him. This is what it sent back." The thing that had been Tom Yates circled their cave entrance, never quite crossing the threshold. It made sounds that might have been words, might have been pleas, might have been warnings. After an hour, it shambled back into the storm, leaving only claw marks in the ice as proof it had been there. "The mountain keeps them," Frank said. "Everyone who really defies it, everyone who won't accept the rules. It changes them and sends them back as reminders. There are dozens of them up in the higher peaks. We leave food out sometimes, try to keep them away from the caves." Merle felt his resolve weakening. The thought of becoming one of those things, neither human nor animal, neither alive nor dead, was worse than simply accepting his fate. But he couldn't give up. Not yet. Sarah deserved to know what had happened to him. She deserved closure, not just another missing trucker story. He started keeping a journal, writing down everything that had happened, everything he'd learned about the mountain and its prisoners. If he couldn't escape, maybe someday someone would find his words and understand. The journal became his lifeline, his connection to sanity. The rescue operations were the strangest part of their existence. When the mountain took someone new, they all felt it. A vibration in the rock, a change in the air pressure, a knowing that transcended physical senses. They would rush to their modified trucks, navigate the impossible terrain, and try to save whoever had been caught. Sometimes they succeeded. More often, they were too late. The mountain was selective about who it kept and who it let die. There seemed to be no pattern to its choices. Young, old, experienced, novice, the mountain's decisions were inscrutable. A month into Merle's captivity, they detected another avalanche. A big one, multiple vehicles caught. The trapped truckers mobilized quickly, their response coordinated by years of practice. Merle rode with Dave, still learning how to operate in their strange new reality. They found 3 trucks buried. 2 were already gone, the occupants crushed instantly by the massive force of the slide. But the third, a small moving van, still had life signs. Dave's modified equipment could detect heartbeats through tons of snow. Another innovation born of necessity. They dug frantically, racing against time and cold. The driver was a young woman, maybe 25, unconscious but alive. As they pulled her free, Merle felt the mountain's attention like a physical weight. It was deciding. "Not this one," Dave said to the air, to the mountain, to whatever intelligence governed this place. "She's too young. She has no experience. She wouldn't survive here. Let her go." The mountain considered. Merle could feel it thinking. If something made of rock and snow could think. Then, miraculously, the pressure eased. They were able to carry the woman down to the road, to leave her where the rescue teams would find her. She would wake up in a hospital, believing she'd been saved by ordinary rescuers, never knowing how close she'd come to joining the ranks of the vanished. "Why?" Merle asked as they climbed back to their shelf. "Why did it let her go?" "Sometimes it does," Dave said. "If we advocate strongly enough, if the person truly wouldn't survive here. The mountain isn't cruel exactly. It just has needs. We fulfill those needs, watching the pass, saving who we can, maintaining the balance. In exchange, it lets us live and occasionally shows mercy. That's insane. You're talking about it like it's sentient, isn't it? After everything you've seen, can you really believe this is just unusual geology?" Merle couldn't answer that. The evidence of his senses said the mountain was alive, aware, making conscious decisions. But accepting that meant accepting that the world was far stranger than he'd ever imagined. Spring came slowly to the pass, though at their elevation it made little difference. The snow never fully melted on the high peaks, and the temperature rarely rose above freezing even in direct sunlight. But the avalanche danger decreased, which meant fewer rescue operations and more time for Merle to brood on his situation. He'd been there 3 months when Leland Voss did something unexpected. The trucker had been haunting the pass since Merle's disappearance, making run after run through the dangerous territory. The trapped truckers had noticed him, discussed him. He was looking for something, looking for Merle. One day, Leland stopped at mile marker 44, the exact spot where Merle had vanished. He got out of his truck with surveying equipment, geological instruments, tools that no trucker should have. He began taking measurements, samples, readings. "He knows something," Patricia said, watching through binoculars. "Or suspects." They watched for 3 days as Leland conducted his investigation. He mapped the avalanche patterns, tested the snow composition, even set up cameras at various angles. On the 3rd night, he did something that made them all freeze in shock. He looked directly at their hidden shelf and waved. "Merle Taggart," he shouted, his voice carrying in the thin mountain air. "I know you're up there. I've analyzed the avalanche pattern, the debris field. Your truck was moved after the slide. The angle's all wrong for natural displacement." The trapped truckers looked at each other in amazement. No one had ever figured it out before. Families had searched, investigators had come and gone, but nobody had ever realized the truth. "I've been researching the history of this pass," Leland continued. "The disappearances go back over a century, too many to be coincidence. And the native stories, they talk about the mountain that keeps men, the peak that builds its own tribe. You're up there, aren't you? All of you who've gone missing." Dave grabbed Merle's arm as he moved toward the edge. "Don't. The mountain won't let you respond. And if he gets too close to the truth..." As if in response to Dave's words, the mountain rumbled. Small slides began on the peaks above Leland's position. Warning shots. But Leland didn't retreat. "I'm not leaving," he shouted. "Merle saved my life once. 3 years ago, jackknifed in a blizzard. He stopped, spent 4 hours in -40 weather, helping me get my rig running again. I owe him." Merle remembered that night. He'd almost frozen his fingers off fixing Leland's fuel line. Sarah had been furious that he'd risked himself for a stranger. But that was the trucker's code. You helped your own. "I've brought supplies," Leland continued. "Food, medicine, equipment. I'm going to leave them at the base of the avalanche field. I'll come back every month with more. If you can't come down, at least let me help you survive." The mountain's rumbling grew louder. Larger slides started forming. Leland had minutes, maybe less, before the mountain decided to silence him permanently. "Go!" Merle shouted, not caring about the consequences. "Get out of here, Leland, now!" His voice seemed to break something. The mountain's attention snapped to him like a searchlight. He felt its anger, its sense of betrayal. He'd broken the cardinal rule, no contact with the world below. Leland heard him, though. The man looked up, triumph and sorrow mixing on his face. Then he ran for his truck as the mountain unleashed its fury. The avalanche that followed was massive. But Leland had already started driving. He made it out by seconds, his truck disappearing around a bend just as the snow consumed the road. The punishment came immediately. The mountain expelled Merle from the caves, literally pushing him out with a wind that couldn't exist. He tumbled into the snow, the cold hitting him like a physical blow. The other truckers tried to help him, but they were pushed back too. This was between Merle and the mountain. He was dragged upward, not by any visible force, but by the mountain's will. Up past the shelf, past the caves into the realm of the Changed Ones. He could see them in the distance. The things that had once been human, watching with their two long limbs and frozen faces. The mountain showed him visions as he climbed. It had been sleeping for millennia until humans cut the road through its heart. The pain had woken it, and in its pain, it had lashed out. The avalanches weren't random. They were the mountain's immune system, trying to expel the infection of asphalt and steel. But then it had discovered something interesting. Some of the humans it caught had knowledge, skills. They could be useful. So it kept them, learned from them, used them to save others of their kind. It was a symbiotic relationship, or at least that's how the mountain saw it. Merle saw the mountain's memory of every trucker it had taken, every decision to keep or release. He saw Tom Yates's rebellion and transformation, saw others who had accepted their fate and lived peacefully for decades before dying of natural causes and being absorbed into the mountain's substance. He saw possible futures, one where he accepted his role and lived out his years in relative comfort, another where he fought and became another changed one, haunting the high peaks forever. "I understand," Merle gasped through frozen lips. "But I can't accept it. I have a wife, a life I'm not yours to keep." The mountain considered this. Then it showed him something else. Sarah, his wife, moving on. A year from now, she would remarry. 3 years from now, she would have a child. She would be happy, happier than she'd been with him in his dangerous job and constant absences. His death, painful as it was, would free her to find a better life. "That's not your choice to make," Merle said, though the vision shook him. The mountain's response was to drag him higher, into the realm of perpetual ice where nothing human could survive. He felt his body beginning to change, to adapt to the impossible cold and thin air. His fingers were elongating, his skin taking on the blue-white hue of deep ice. This was how it happened, the transformation from human to changed one. But then he heard engines, multiple engines, roaring up from below. The other trapped truckers had mobilized, all of them, racing up the mountainside in their impossible vehicles. They were coming for him. "Let him go," Dave's voice echoed off the peaks. "He's one of ours. You gave him to us. You can't take him back." The mountain paused. There were rules, apparently, even for it. The trapped truckers were its servants, but they were also a community, a tribe. And tribes protected their own. What followed was a negotiation conducted without words. The truckers formed a circle with their vehicles, engines running, creating a bubble of heat and diesel fumes and human stubbornness. The mountain pressed in from all sides, but couldn't or wouldn't simply crush them. Finally, a compromise was reached. Merle would be returned to the caves, but he would be marked. If he ever tried to leave again, tried to communicate with the world below, the transformation would resume instantly. He would become a changed one without the gradual adaptation, which meant he would be conscious for every moment of the horror. They brought him back down. his partially transformed body slowly reverting to mostly human. The elongated fingers shortened, though they remained longer than normal. The ice blue tinge to his skin faded, but left strange patterns, like frostbite scars in fractal designs. His eyes retained a reflective quality that caught the light like a nocturnal animal's. "You're an idiot," Patricia said as they wrapped him in thermal blankets back in the caves. "But a brave idiot." "Leland needed to know," Merle croaked through a throat raw from screaming he didn't remember. "Someone down there needed to know we're alive. And now he does. And he'll either be driven mad by the knowledge or he'll find a way to help. Either way, you've changed things." She was right. Leland's monthly supply drops became a lifeline, not just for the physical goods, but for the psychological connection to the world below. He left newspapers, letters from families, updates on the outside world. The mountain tolerated it, perhaps understanding that even it couldn't completely sever human connections. But there was a price. The mountain's mood grew darker, its tests more frequent. The changed ones came closer to the caves, their transformed faces pressing against windows made of salvaged truck glass. The rescue operations became more dangerous, with the mountain sometimes actively fighting their efforts to save people. 6 months had passed since Merle's attempted escape and partial transformation. The frostbite patterns on his skin had become permanent, spreading like a map of frozen rivers across his arms and chest. In darkness, they glowed faintly with a blue light that reminded him of deep glacier ice. His extended fingers had proven useful for climbing, but they ached constantly in a way that normal painkillers couldn't touch. Leland's supply drops had evolved into something more sophisticated. He'd started leaving electronic equipment, tablets loaded with messages from families, solar chargers that somehow worked despite the mountain's electromagnetic interference. Even a ham radio that could occasionally punch through the mountain's shield during specific atmospheric conditions. The mountain tolerated these intrusions with what seemed like resigned annoyance, like a parent allowing a child a forbidden toy. It was during one of these radio windows that Merle heard Sarah's voice for the first time since his disappearance. Leland had arranged it, convinced her that he was conducting some kind of experimental long-range communication research. She didn't know she was talking to her supposedly dead husband. "This is Sarah Taggart." Her voice crackled through the static. "I'm told this message might reach truckers in remote areas. I wanted to say, if anyone knew my husband Merle, if anyone was with him near the end, I just want you to know he was loved. He was so loved." Merle held the radio handset with his elongated fingers, unable to speak. Dave sat beside him, ready to cut the connection if Merle tried to reveal himself. The mountain's attention was focused on them like a weight, ready to enforce its rules. "I'm moving to Portland," Sarah continued. "My sister lives there. I can't stay in Alaska anymore. Everything reminds me of him. The insurance money came through, so at least I can start over. I just wish I could have said goodbye." The transmission ended. Merle sat in the cave's dim light, the radio silent in his hands. Around him, the other trapped truckers maintained a respectful silence. They'd all been through this, the moment when the last connection to their old life finally severed. "She's moving on," Patricia said gently. "That's good. That's what you'd want for her." "Is it?" Merle asked. "Or is that just what we tell ourselves to make this bearable?" Nobody answered. There was no good answer. The summer brought unexpected challenges. The warmer temperatures, such as they were at this altitude, destabilized the ice caves they relied on for storage. Food spoiled faster. The modified trucks required more maintenance as the freeze-thaw cycle wreaked havoc on their improvised components, and the changed ones grew bolder. Merle encountered his first changed one up close during a repair mission to one of their water collection systems. He was alone, working on a pipe that had cracked when he felt eyes on him. The creature that had once been a woman named Linda Frost stood 20 feet away, watching him with eyes that reflected the noon sun like mirrors. Linda had been a trucker from Washington State, taken by the mountain in 2015. She'd fought for 3 weeks before attempting a desperate escape that had resulted in her transformation. Now she stood 7 feet tall, her limbs stretched and reformed for climbing. Her fingers had become ice picks. Her skin had the translucent quality of fresh ice, with her bones visible as dark shadows beneath. "Hello, Merle," she said, her voice like wind through ice caves. The fact that she could still speak, still remember, made it worse somehow. "Linda, the others told me about you. Did they tell you it doesn't hurt?" She tilted her head at an angle that would have snapped a normal person's neck. "The transformation. After the first few days, the pain goes away. You become something new, something that belongs here. Is that supposed to comfort me? It's supposed to prepare you. We all transform eventually. Those who fight, like I did. Those who accept it and die of old age. The mountain absorbs them just the same. Even Dave, our noble leader, will eventually become part of the mountain. It's not a curse. It's an evolution." She moved closer, her ice-pick fingers clicking against the rocks. "I can feel the change starting in you. Those marks, those beautiful frost patterns. You're already becoming something more than human. Why fight it? Because I choose to remain who I am." Linda laughed, a sound like icicles breaking. Choice. Such a human concept. The mountain doesn't care about your choices. It cares about survival, adaptation, purpose. You serve a purpose now, whether you accept it or not. She left without another word, scaling the vertical cliff face with an ease that made Merle's modified climbing abilities look clumsy. But her words stayed with him. The frost patterns on his skin were spreading, slowly but noticeably. His eyes were becoming more reflective. His tolerance for cold was increasing beyond what thick clothing could explain. The radio crackled to life unexpectedly that evening. It was Opal Briggs, the state trooper dispatcher who had coordinated the original rescue attempt. But she wasn't speaking in her official capacity. "This is a message for anyone listening on this frequency," she said. "I know you're out there, the missing truckers. Leland Voss has been telling people, showing his evidence. Most think he's crazy, but I've been looking at the patterns. 27 truckers missing on Thompson Pass over 30 years. Bodies never found. That's not coincidence." Dave grabbed the radio from Merle. "Don't respond. It could be a trap." But Opal continued. "I'm not trying to expose you or rescue you. Leland explained that you can't leave. I just wanted you to know that some of us down here know the truth. We're working on keeping people away from the pass during dangerous conditions, reducing traffic. If you're trapped up there, at least we can try to prevent more people from joining you." It was a kindness they hadn't expected from the outside world. The mountain seemed to consider this development, its attention shifting like a massive creature turning in its sleep. Then, surprisingly, it allowed a response. Dave keyed the radio. "This is a friend. Thank you, Opal. Keep people safe. That's all we want." The connection held for a moment longer, then cut out as the mountain reasserted its control. But something had changed. The outside world, or at least a small part of it, acknowledged their existence. They weren't just missing persons anymore. They were known, even if that knowledge couldn't free them. A week later, everything went wrong. It started with an earthquake, magnitude 6.2, epicenter directly beneath Thompson Pass. The mountain convulsed, avalanches cascading down every slope simultaneously. The caves shook, sections collapsing. The trapped truckers scrambled for safety, their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. But the earthquake was just the beginning. As the mountain shook, something deep within it woke up. Something older than the intelligence they'd been dealing with. Something that had been sleeping beneath layers of rock and ice for geological ages. Merle felt it first, the frost patterns on his skin suddenly burning with cold fire. All around him, the other truckers cried out as similar sensations hit them. The partial transformations they'd all undergone, the little bits of mountain that had seeped into their bodies, all activated at once. "The core," Frank gasped, falling to his knees. "It's the mountain's core. It's awakening." Through the cave entrance, they could see impossible things happening. The mountain was reshaping itself, peaks shifting, valleys forming and disappearing. The road below cracked and buckled, decades of human engineering erased in seconds. And rising from the mountain's heart, visible through tears and reality itself, was something that hurt to perceive. It wasn't solid or liquid or gas. It existed in more dimensions than human eyes could process, causing violent headaches just to look at it. But at its center was something recognizable. A consciousness older than multicellular life, older than the continents themselves. The mountain wasn't possessed by something alien. The mountain was the alien, a being from Earth's primordial past that had been sleeping since the planet cooled. The changed ones came flooding down from the high peaks, but they weren't attacking. They were fleeing. Whatever was rising from the mountain's core was as terrifying to them as it was to the still mostly human truckers. "Everyone to the trucks," Dave shouted, but his voice was distorting, becoming something between human speech and avalanche rumble. The transformation was accelerating in all of them. They ran for their modified vehicles, but the trucks were changing too. The mountain's awakening was affecting everything its influence had touched. Engines merged with rock formations. Tires became living things that gripped the ground with organic tendrils. The vehicles were evolving into something between machine and mountain creature. Merle climbed into what had been his assigned truck, feeling the seat conform to his changing body. His elongated fingers merged with the steering wheel, becoming part of the vehicle's control system. Through the windshield, which was transforming into something like an eye, he could see the world in spectrums that didn't have names. The entity at the mountain's core was fully awake now, and it was angry. Angry at being disturbed. Angry at the parasites, humans, that had infected its body, the mountain. Angry at the hybrid things, the trapped truckers, that were neither one thing nor another. It spoke without words, communicating directly with the parts of their bodies that were mountain stuff. The message was simple: choose. Become fully mountain, part of its body, servants of its will. Or be expelled, purged from its system like an infection, which, at this point, would mean death. "There has to be another way," Dave said, but his voice was barely human anymore. His body was stretching, adapting to the mountain's demands. That's when Leland Voss did something insane. He drove his truck directly into the chaos, somehow navigating the destroyed road, avoiding the avalanches and reality tears through what could only be described as miraculous driving. But it wasn't his normal Peterbilt. He'd modified it with equipment that looked military, scientific, and possibly alien. "I've been preparing for this." His voice boomed through loudspeakers that cut through the electromagnetic interference. The government knew. They've always known. The mountain is a guardian, one of 12 around the planet. They keep things sleeping that should never wake. He deployed devices from his truck, stakes that drove themselves into the ground and projected energy fields. The entity's attention turned to him, and Merle could feel its surprise. These devices were familiar to it. Technology from the same era it came from, preserved and reverse-engineered by humans who'd found other sleeping guardians. "You don't have to choose," Leland shouted to the trapped truckers. "There's a third option. The Guardians can create symbiotes, beings that are both human and Guardian, bridges between the species. It's been done before." The entity considered this. Through his connection to it, Merle could feel its ancient memory searching, finding references to similar situations on other worlds, in other eons. The symbiote solution was dangerous, unstable, but possible. What followed was a negotiation conducted in languages that predated human speech. Leland somehow was fluent in these impossible tongues. He argued, persuaded, threatened, and finally bargained. The devices he'd planted weren't just communication tools, they were weapons. Bombs that could wound a Guardian, maybe even kill one if it was weak enough from its awakening. The deal that was struck was complex, but its essence was simple. The trapped truckers would become true symbiotes, half human and half Guardian. They would be able to leave the mountain for limited periods, walk among humans, but they would always return. They would be the mountain's agents in the human world, protecting it from development, from exploitation, ensuring its sleep remained undisturbed. In exchange, the Guardian would sleep again, not stirring for another 1,000 years. The road would be rebuilt, but with restrictions. Traffic would be limited. The most dangerous areas would be permanently closed, and the symbiotes would manage it all, appearing as normal humans most of the time, transforming only when necessary. The transformation from trapped to symbiote was agonizing. Merle felt every cell in his body being rewritten, his DNA merging with something that wasn't quite matter as humans understood it. His consciousness expanded, touching the Guardian's vast mind, seeing the Earth from a perspective of billions of years. He saw the Guardians' arrival in Earth's youth, their role in shepherding the planet through cosmic dangers humanity couldn't imagine. He saw civilizations rise and fall, some human-like, others utterly alien. He saw the reason for the Guardians' sleep. They were waiting, watching, ready to wake if certain conditions were met. Conditions that humanity was dangerously close to triggering. When the transformation was complete, Merle found himself standing on the broken road, looking human again. Mostly human. The frost patterns were gone, replaced by skin that could shift between normal and armored at will. His fingers were regular length but could extend when needed. His eyes appeared brown but could see in spectrums that would have burned out normal human neurons. The other truckers stood around him, all similarly transformed. Dave looked decades younger, the symbiosis having repaired years of wear and tear. Patricia's gray hair had turned black with streaks of silver that seemed to move like liquid mercury. Even Frank, ancient Frank, stood straighter, his body renewed by Guardian biology. "We're free," Dave said, wonderingly. "We can leave?" "For a time," Leland corrected. He looked exhausted, aged by his negotiation with the entity. "You need to return to the mountain for 1 week out of every 4. It's part of the symbiosis, and you'll need to manage the pass, keep it safe, prevent anyone from disturbing the Guardian's sleep." "What about our families?" Janet Rodriguez asked. "Can we go home?" "That's up to you. But remember, you're not entirely human anymore. You'll age slower, maybe not at all. You'll have abilities that will be hard to explain. And if the Guardian ever needs you, really needs you, you'll have no choice but to answer its call." Merle thought of Sarah, already moving to Portland, already starting her new life. Could he walk back into that life as something inhuman, should he? The Guardian settled back into sleep, the mountain resuming its normal shape though with some differences. New caves had formed, comfortable ones with natural heating and water, designed for symbiote habitation. The road was reformed but narrower, with permanent barriers at the most dangerous sections. And deep beneath the surface, the ancient entity dreamed its billion-year dreams, content that its new servants would protect its slumber. Opal Briggs was the first official to arrive once the chaos settled. She looked at the gathered truckers, people who'd been missing for years standing around like they'd just stopped for coffee. "So the stories were true," she said. "Some of them," Dave replied. "We need to talk about how this is going to work. The cover story. The official explanation. Mass hallucination caused by gas leaks from the earthquake," Opal said immediately. "You were all trapped in various locations, but rescued. Memory loss from hypothermia explains the time gaps. The destroyed records from the earthquake eliminate any inconsistencies." She'd thought this through, Merle realized. She'd been preparing for something like this. "And the pass?" Patricia asked. "Restricted access, environmental protection zone. Native American groups have already been pushing for it. This gives us the excuse." Opal smiled grimly. "The paperwork's already in motion. Leland's been busy." They worked through the night, creating identities, explanations, cover stories. The symbiotes would become an informal organization of road safety monitors, funded through channels that wouldn't be examined too closely. They would live near the pass, maintaining the fiction of normal lives while serving their true purpose. As dawn broke over Thompson Pass, Merle stood at the edge of the road, looking down at the valley where normal life continued unaware. He could feel the Guardian's presence, vast and sleeping, a constant whisper in the back of his mind. His new nature pulled him in two directions, toward the humanity he'd fought to preserve, and toward the alien consciousness he was now part of. His phone, somehow still functional despite everything, showed 17 missed calls from Sarah's sister. The outside world was waiting for explanations. He could go to Portland, try to reclaim some version of his old life. Or he could accept that Merle Taggart the human had died in an avalanche, and something new had been born from that death. "You don't have to decide today," Dave said, joining him. "We have time. More time than we know what to do with, probably. Does it get easier, being split between two worlds?" Dave considered this. "No, but it gets familiar, and familiar can feel like easy if you let it." They stood in silence, watching the sun rise over the transformed pass. The road was already being traveled. Truckers who had no idea what had happened here during the night. Some honked their horns in greeting, recognizing fellow drivers even if they didn't know their true nature. One truck slowed as it passed. The driver, a young woman, rolled down her window. "You boys need help? Saw the earthquake damage. A lot of folks got stranded." "We're good," Merle replied. "Just making sure everyone gets through safely." She smiled. "That's what I love about you old-timers, always looking out for the rest of us." She drove on, unaware she'd been talking to something only partially human. "That's what we do now," Patricia said, joining them. "We look out for them, keep them safe from things they can't understand. And if another Guardian wakes up," Merle asked. "Leland said there were 12. "Then we deal with it," Dave said. "We're bridges between worlds now. Maybe that's what we were always meant to be." The mountain rumbled gently. Not a threat, but an acknowledgement. The Guardian approved, or at least accepted. The symbiosis was working. But Merle could feel something else through his connection to the ancient entity. The Guardian wasn't just sleeping. It was waiting for something specific, something coming. The conditions it watched for were approaching. Maybe not in human lifetimes, but soon in Guardian terms. When that time came, the symbiotes would be needed for more than managing a mountain pass. They would be humanity's translators, negotiators, the bridge between species when the Guardians woke to face whatever cosmic threat they'd been placed on Earth to prevent. "Leland knows more than he's telling us," Merle said. "Of course he does," Dave replied. "But we have time to learn. All the time in the world." A convoy of trucks approached from the north, heading for Valdez with emergency supplies for the earthquake damage. The symbiotes watched them pass, counting vehicles, assessing drivers, ensuring safe passage through their domain. It was what they did now, what they would do for decades, maybe centuries to come. Merle felt his phone buzz. Another call from Sarah's sister. He could answer it, start the process of reclaiming some version of his human life. Or he could let Merle Taggart remain dead, a victim of the mountain's hunger, and embrace fully what he'd become. The Guardian stirred in its sleep, sharing a fragment of memory. Other worlds, other symbiotes, other bridges between the cosmic and the mundane. They had all faced this choice. Most chose to maintain connections to both worlds, living in the tension between human and other. It was harder but richer, more complex but more rewarding. He answered the phone. "Hello, this is Merle Taggart. Yes, I'm alive. There was an earthquake, an avalanche. I've been recovering. Is Sarah there? I need to talk to my wife." The conversation that followed was difficult, full of tears and questions and half-truths. But it was a beginning. Sarah was shocked, overjoyed, confused. She wanted to see him immediately. He promised to come to Portland soon, after he finished helping with the rescue efforts. It wasn't a lie exactly. He would be helping with rescues for the rest of his extended life. Just not the kind Sarah imagined. As he talked, he felt the other symbiotes listening, drawing strength from his choice to maintain human connections. They began making their own calls, reaching out to whatever remained of their old lives. Some conversations went well. Others ended in rejection, in disbelief, in pain. But they were trying. The sun climbed higher, melting the surface snow that would refreeze tonight in an endless cycle. The Thompson Pass stretched out before them, dangerous and beautiful, a gateway between worlds that they would guard for generations. Leland Voss drove up in his modified truck, now scarred from his encounter with the Guardian. He looked older but satisfied, like someone who'd completed a life's work. "There's going to be a meeting," he said without preamble. "All the symbiote groups from all 12 Guardian sites. The governments involved want coordination, protocols, contingency plans. You'll need to send representatives." "When?" Dave asked. 6 months. Location classified until closer to the date. But you should know, you're not alone. There are hundreds like you around the world, maybe thousands. Bridges between humanity and the Guardians. He handed Dave a satellite phone, military-grade and hardened against electromagnetic interference. "Direct line to the coordination center. Use it sparingly. The Guardians notice too much technology." With that, he drove away, leaving the symbiotes to process this new information. They weren't unique. Their situation wasn't isolated. Around the world, in mountains and deserts and ocean depths, other humans had been transformed into bridges, preparing for something even they didn't fully understand. 3 weeks after the transformation, Merle stood in the parking lot of a Portland shopping center, watching Sarah's car pull into a space 50 feet away. His enhanced senses could hear her heartbeat accelerating as she saw him. He could smell her perfume, the same lavender scent she'd worn since their wedding day. He could see the stress fractures in her emotional field, visible to symbiote eyes as hairline cracks of golden light around her body. She got out of the car slowly, as if approaching a ghost, which, in a way, she was. The Merle Taggart she'd married had died in an avalanche. What stood before her now was something else, wearing his face. "Merle?" Her voice broke on his name. He wanted to run to her, to sweep her into his arms like he would have before. but he could feel the Guardian's presence even here, hundreds of miles from Thompson Pass. It whispered warnings. Too much contact with normal humans could be dangerous. The symbiote biology was still unstable, still adapting. Strong emotions could trigger partial transformations. "Hi, Sarah," he said, keeping his voice steady. She took 3 quick steps, then stopped, her instincts detecting something wrong. Humans couldn't consciously perceive the difference, but their primitive brains recognized a predator, an other, something that shouldn't exist. "You look different," she said carefully. "Your eyes." "The avalanche," he lied smoothly, the words coming from some Guardian-gifted ability to deceive when necessary. "Hypothermia does strange things. Some of the damage is permanent." She accepted this, needed to accept it, and finally closed the distance between them. The moment her hand touched his, he felt the incompatibility. Her warmth was purely human, simple and beautiful. His was something else, warmth generated by processes that violated several laws of thermodynamics. 8 months, she whispered against his chest as she embraced him. 8 months. I thought you were dead. I had a funeral for you. I scattered ashes in Prince William Sound because you always loved it there. I know. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just exist. Be real. Be here. They sat in her car and talked for 3 hours. He told her the cover story. Trapped in a remote location, rescued by emergency teams, months of recovery in a classified military facility due to the unusual nature of his injuries. She told him about her grief, her anger, her slow acceptance, and then the whiplash of learning he was alive. I started seeing someone, she admitted, unable to meet his eyes. Nothing serious yet, but... I thought you were dead, Merle. He felt something shift inside him. Not jealousy exactly, but a Guardian calculation of social dynamics and genetic compatibility. The symbiote part of him analyzed her potential mate with cold efficiency while the human part just hurt. I understand, he said, and meant it. Both parts of him, human and other, understood that linear human relationships were no longer possible for him. Can we try? She asked. Can we try to be us again? We can try, he said, knowing it would fail, knowing she deserved better than a husband who was partially an alien entity older than complex life on Earth. They tried for 2 months. He took an apartment in Portland, got a job at a shipping company that didn't look too closely at employment gaps. Sarah introduced him to her new friends, her grief support group who didn't know how to react to his resurrection. They went through the motions of normality, but the pretense couldn't hold. The first time they tried to be intimate, his body temperature spiked to levels that left burn marks on her skin. When he had nightmares, ice formed on the windows and walls. When strong emotions hit, his eyes would shift to the impossible spectrums that symbiotes could see, and Sarah would freeze like a mouse before a snake. The breaking point came when the Guardian called him back for his mandatory week at Thompson Pass. He tried to explain it as a work obligation, a requirement of his new job. But Sarah wasn't stupid. You're not human anymore, are you? She asked one night, her voice calm with the kind of calm that precedes shattering. I'm still me, he said, which wasn't really an answer. But not only you. He couldn't deny it. The Guardian whispered that she was taking this better than 78% of human partners in similar situations across all symbiote sites. The statistic didn't help. I love you, Sarah said. I will always love the man you were. But I can't love what you've become because I don't understand it. And I'm terrified that if I try to understand it, I'll go insane. They divorced quietly, citing irreconcilable differences. Sarah kept the insurance money, Merle insisted. She moved forward with her new relationship, a normal man named Tom who worked in insurance and would never transform into anything inhuman. Merle returned to Thompson Pass permanently. The symbiote community had evolved rapidly in those months. They'd established a compound near the pass, officially designated as a Transportation Safety Research Facility. The buildings were normal enough on the outside, but inside they were designed for beings who might spontaneously shift between human and guardian forms. Dave had fully embraced his role as leader, coordinating with the other symbiote sites worldwide. Patricia had become their technical expert, somehow understanding the impossible physics of guardian technology. Frank, Ancient Frank, had transformed into something like a living library, his consciousness interfacing directly with the Guardian's billion-year memory. And they weren't alone. New faces had joined them. Not truckers, but scientists, government agents, people who'd been recruited rather than accidentally transformed. The program was expanding, preparing for something. Leland Voss visited regularly, bringing updates from the outside world. The other Guardian sites were reporting increased activity. The one beneath Yellowstone had stirred 3 times in the past month. The one in the Mariana Trench had begun emanating signals in frequencies that hurt human ears but conveyed complex information to symbiotes. "They're waking up," Leland explained during one briefing. "Not fully, not like Thompson Pass did. But they're becoming aware. Something's coming." "What?" Merle asked. "The briefings call it a cosmic incursion event. Earth passes through regions of space sometimes, regions where the laws of physics work differently. The last time was 65 million years ago." Everyone in the room understood the implication. The dinosaurs. "The Guardians prevented total extinction," Leland continued. "But they couldn't save everything. This time, with human civilization in the mix, the stakes are higher. The symbiotes are part of the defense system." Training began immediately. Not physical training. Their symbiote bodies were already capable of impossible feats. This was consciousness training, learning to merge more fully with the Guardian when needed, to access its vast knowledge and power without losing their human selves completely. Merle excelled at it. Perhaps because he'd already lost so much of his human life, he had less resistance to the merger. He could sink into the Guardian's consciousness for hours, experiencing reality from a perspective of geological time, seeing patterns in cosmic radiation that predicted future events. During one deep merger, the Guardian showed him something that changed everything. The cosmic incursion wasn't random. Something was coming to Earth deliberately, drawn by signals humanity had been inadvertently broadcasting into space. Radio waves, television signals, nuclear tests, all had created a beacon that attracted entities from regions where different physics allowed for different forms of life. These entities weren't malevolent exactly. They simply existed in ways that were incompatible with Earth's reality. Their presence would cause matter to break down, energy to flow in impossible directions, life, as humans understood it, to cease. The Guardians had been placed on Earth specifically to prevent such incursions, to maintain the local physics that allowed for carbon-based life. But the Guardians were tired. Billions of years of vigilance had worn them down. They needed agents, beings who could operate in both the physical and consciousness realms, who could fight incursions on multiple levels of reality. Hence, the symbiotes. The first test came 6 months later. Merle was on patrol, driving one of the modified trucks along the high paths above the official road, when reality tore. It started as a shimmer in the air, like heat distortion but in winter. Then the shimmer expanded, and through it came something that shouldn't exist. It had no fixed form. One moment it looked like a crystalline spider the size of a house, the next like a flowing liquid that defied gravity. It existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, which made looking at it cause severe headaches and nosebleeds in normal humans. But Merle's symbiote eyes could process it, categorize it, understand it as a scout for the larger incursion. He responded without thinking, his body shifting to full symbiote form. His skin became something between flesh and mineral, capable of withstanding temperatures and pressures that would vaporize normal matter. His consciousness expanded, touching the Guardian's vast mind, drawing on its knowledge of how to fight such entities. The battle was brief but intense. The entity tried to establish a foothold in Earth's reality, to create a bubble where its physics would override local laws. Merle countered by channeling the Guardian's will through his body, reinforcing local reality, making Earth's physics absolute in this location. The entity retreated, sliding back through the tear it had created. But as it departed, it communicated something, not in words, but in concepts that bypassed language. More were coming, many more. The incursion would happen whether Earth was ready or not. Merle reported the encounter immediately. Within hours, symbiotes from around the world were communicating, sharing similar experiences. The scouts were probing Earth's defenses, testing the Guardians, learning. An emergency meeting was called at a location that turned out to be beneath Mount Denali, where another Guardian slept. Representatives from all 12 sites gathered in a chamber that existed partially outside normal space-time, allowing beings from different parts of the planet to meet instantly. Merle had never seen so many symbiotes in one place. They came in various forms, some mostly human in appearance, others showing more dramatic transformations. The symbiotes from the ocean sites had developed gills and scales. Those from desert sites had skin that could photosynthesize. Each had adapted to their guardian's specific nature. The meeting was chaired by someone Merle hadn't expected, a woman in her 70s who introduced herself as Dr. Elizabeth Cray, the first human to successfully achieve symbiosis back in 1962. "The incursion will occur in 18 months, she announced without preamble. "Our intelligence indicates it will be the largest Earth has faced in its history. We're looking at potentially thousands of entities attempting to establish beachheads in our reality." A symbiote from the Sahara site raised a hand. "Can the Guardians stop them all?" "Not alone. Not anymore. The Guardians are powerful, but finite. They've been spending their energy maintaining Earth's reality bubble for billions of years. They're depleted. That's why they created us." She gestured to a map that showed not Earth's geography but its metaphysical structure, the weak points where reality was thin, where incursions were most likely. "Thompson Pass is one of 12 primary nodes," she explained. "If any node falls, the entire defense network collapses. Each site must be held at all costs." Merle studied the map, noting that most nodes were in remote locations, but a few were dangerously close to population centers. If the incursions happened there, millions would witness things that could shatter human sanity. "What about evacuation?" Patricia asked. She'd accompanied Merle to the meeting. "Cover stories are being prepared. Natural disasters, industrial accidents, whatever it takes to clear civilians from the danger zones. But some exposure is inevitable. Humanity is about to learn it's not alone in the universe, and not in a friendly first contact way." The meeting continued for hours, covering battle strategies, communication protocols, worst-case scenarios. Merle found himself appointed as Thompson Pass's primary warrior, the symbiote most capable of full merger with the Guardian during combat. It was an honor he didn't want but couldn't refuse. When they returned to Thompson Pass, the preparation began in earnest. The compound was fortified with materials that existed partially in other dimensions, creating barriers against incursion entities. Weapons were developed that could harm things without fixed physical form. and the symbiotes trained constantly, pushing the limits of their transformation abilities. During this time, Merle received a final call from Sarah. She was pregnant with Tom's child, wanted him to know before he heard it elsewhere. She wished him well in whatever strange life he'd chosen. He congratulated her, meant it, and knew they would never speak again. The human part of him grieved. The guardian part noted the genetic diversity of her offspring and approved. The symbiote whole of him filed the emotion away and continued preparing for war. Other truckers still used Thompson Pass, unaware of the hive of activity above the road. Occasionally one would break down or get caught in weather, and the symbiotes would rescue them, maintaining their cover as safety monitors. These moments of normal human interaction became precious, reminders of what they were fighting to protect. One trucker in particular caught Merle's attention. A young woman named Casey who ran the route weekly, always alone, always pushing through dangerous conditions that would have sent veterans looking for alternate routes. She had the kind of fearless determination that the mountain noticed. "She's a potential," Dave observed, watching Casey's truck disappear into a blizzard that had everyone else pulled over. "The Guardian's interested?" "More than interested, it's been testing her. Small avalanches that she somehow avoids. Ice that breaks everywhere except where she drives. The mountain likes her." Merle felt a protective instinct surge. "We can't let it take her. Not now. Not with what's coming." "We might not have a choice. If the incursion is as bad as they predict, we'll need every symbiote we can get. And willing volunteers are stronger than forced transformations." They watched Casey's truck navigate impossible conditions over the following weeks. The Guardian was definitely grooming her, creating situations that revealed her exceptional abilities. She had an intuitive understanding of the mountain's moods, knowing when to push forward and when to wait. Finally, the Guardian made its move. A massive avalanche, perfectly timed to trap Casey's truck but not destroy it. The symbiotes mobilized for the rescue, but Merle arrived first. He found Casey standing beside her trapped truck, looking up at the mountain with an expression of understanding rather than fear. "You're one of them," she said when she saw him. "The missing truckers. You never left, did you?" "How do you know about that?" "My grandfather was Inuit. He told me stories about the mountain that takes people, makes them into something else. He said it wasn't evil, just different, ancient, necessary." Merle felt the Guardian's attention focusing on them. This was a crucial moment. Casey could be rescued and returned to her normal life, or she could be offered a choice that would change her forever. "Something's coming," Casey continued. "I can feel it in the ice, in the wind. The mountain's afraid. It needs help." "Yes." "And you're that help, you and the others." "Yes." She looked at her trapped truck, then back at Merle. "I have a choice, don't I? Go back to my life or become like you. You always have a choice. But once you choose, there's no going back." Casey was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the mountain held its breath. The other symbiotes had arrived but kept their distance, recognizing the delicate nature of this moment. "My grandfather also said that sometimes the spirits choose people for important work," Casey said. "That refusing the call brings worse consequences than accepting it. Your grandfather was wise. If I say yes, what happens?" Merle showed her. He let his human disguise drop, revealing the symbiote beneath. His skin rippled with patterns that looked like living aurora borealis. His eyes became windows into the cosmic void. His presence expanded beyond the merely physical, touching dimensions that normal humans couldn't perceive. Casey didn't run. She didn't scream. She studied him with the same fearless curiosity that had brought her through so many dangerous passages. "Will I still be me?" she asked. You'll be more than you, and less, different. But the core of who you are, that remains. And I'll help protect people, stop whatever's coming? That's the hope. Casey nodded. Then yes. The transformation happened immediately. The Guardian had been waiting, preparing her body through weeks of subtle exposure. The change was smoother than Merle's had been, less violent. Casey gasped as her consciousness expanded, touching the Guardian's ancient mind. Her body shifted, adapted, became something that could survive in conditions that would kill normal humans. When it was over, she stood transformed. Her skin had a crystalline quality, like living ice that could bend without breaking. Her eyes held depths that reflected the mountain's billion-year memory. She was beautiful and terrible, human and other. "Oh," she said, her voice harmonizing with frequencies only symbiotes could hear. "Oh, I understand now. I understand everything." They brought her back to the compound, integrated her into their community. She adapted quickly, her natural affinity for the mountain making the transition easier than it had been for the accidentally transformed. Within weeks, she was participating in patrols, rescues, and preparation for the incursion. The final months passed quickly. Around the world, reports came in of increasing incursion activity. The entity scouts were becoming bolder, sometimes manifesting in populated areas. The government cover stories were wearing thin. Conspiracy theorists were getting dangerously close to the truth. Leland Voss brought disturbing news. 3 of the Guardian sites have gone dark. Mount Fuji, the Sahara node, and the one in Antarctica. We've lost contact with their symbiotes. Are they dead? Patricia asked. Unknown. The sites are still there, but they're changed. Surrounded by fields that distort reality. Nothing can get close enough to investigate. The Thompson Pass symbiotes increased their vigilance. If 3 sites had fallen, the pressure on the remaining 9 would be immense. The Guardian stirred more frequently, sharing visions of the coming storm. Then, on a clear February morning with the temperature at -35, exactly 1 year after Merle's transformation, it began. The sky cracked. Not clouds, not atmosphere, but the actual space above them developed a fissure that leaked impossible colors. Through the crack, entities began pouring into Earth's reality. They came in hundreds, each one a violation of physics, a wound in the fabric of space-time. The Guardian woke fully, its consciousness exploding through every symbiote simultaneously. Merle felt his individuality dissolve into something larger, a collective defense system with multiple bodies but one purpose. The mountain itself began to change, revealing that what humans had thought was a natural formation was actually a guardian in a chrysalis of rock and ice. The battle was beyond human comprehension. It took place in multiple dimensions simultaneously. In the physical realm, the symbiotes fought entities that shifted between states of matter, that existed in several locations at once, that rewrote the laws of physics by their mere presence. Casey proved exceptional, her natural connection to the Guardian allowing her to channel its power more efficiently than symbiotes with years of experience. She held the Eastern approach single-handedly, creating barriers of crystallized reality that the entities couldn't penetrate. Patricia and Dave worked together, their complementary skills allowing them to trap entities in loops of distorted space-time, containing them until they could be destroyed. Frank interfaced directly with the Guardian's consciousness, coordinating the defense across multiple dimensional fronts. And Merle fought at the center, where the largest entities attempted to establish their beachhead. He had ceased to be singular, becoming instead a conduit for the Guardian's full power. His body shifted constantly, one moment human-sized, the next towering hundreds of feet tall. He wielded forces that humans had no names for, weapons that existed in theoretical physics equations but had never been observed in nature. The battle raged for 7 hours that felt like 7 eternities. Reality warped and rewrote itself dozens of times. The mountain changed shape, revealing its true form as a massive crystalline entity that had been dormant for eons. The very air became solid in places, gaseous rock in others. Through it all, the normal world continued just below. Truckers on the Richardson Highway experienced some unusual weather, maybe a few minor earthquakes. They had no idea that reality itself was being defended just above their heads. The symbiotes maintained the illusion, keeping the horror contained, protecting humanity from knowledge that would shatter minds. Finally, after casualties that included 3 symbiotes dissolved into component atoms and reformed, the incursion was repelled. The entities retreated through their dimensional rift, which the Guardian sealed with a finality that resonated through every atom in a 1,000-mile radius. The aftermath was exhaustion beyond description. The symbiotes collapsed where they stood, their bodies struggling to maintain coherent form after channeling such power. The Guardian settled back into dormancy, but lighter somehow, depleted by the battle. Merle found himself on the road, somehow transported there during the fighting. His body was primarily human again, though he could feel the symbiote nature beneath, forever changed by what he'd channeled. Casey was beside him, her crystalline skin slowly reverting to something that could pass for normal. "Is it over?" she asked. "This one is. There will be others." She nodded, accepting this with the adaptability that had made her an exceptional symbiote. "Then we keep watch. We keep fighting. For how long? For as long as Earth needs us." A truck approached, slowing as the driver saw 2 people standing on the empty highway. The window rolled down, revealing Leland Voss. 6 sites held completely, he reported. 2 partially fell but were retaken. 3 remain compromised. The incursion was stopped, but barely. Casualties? 47 symbiotes globally, hundreds of civilian witnesses who'll need memory adjustment, and 1 Guardian, the one in Australia, died completely. Its node is now undefended. The implications were staggering. If Guardians could die, if nodes could fall permanently, then Earth's defense was not sustainable indefinitely. "There's going to be a new protocol," Leland continued. "Recruitment is being expanded. Every potential candidate is being evaluated. We need more symbiotes, possibly thousands more, before the next incursion." Merle thought of all the truckers who traveled these dangerous roads, the ones with the right combination of bravery and foolishness to challenge nature daily. Many of them could be candidates. Many of them would face the same choice Casey had. "What about the public?" Patricia asked, having recovered enough to join them. "How long can we keep this secret?" "Best estimates, 5 years, maybe 10. Eventually, something will happen that can't be covered up. Humanity will learn the truth." They stood on the empty highway, symbiotes and human ally, contemplating a future where the hidden war would become visible, where humanity would have to accept that it shared the universe with forces beyond comprehension, and that its survival depended on those willing to become bridges between worlds. The mountain rumbled gently, not a threat, but a reminder. It was still there, still watching, still needing its symbiotes. The pass was clear for now, ready for the normal flow of commerce and travel. But above the road, in the high places where humans rarely ventured, the Guardians of Thompson Pass maintained their vigil. Merle looked at his transformed hands, no longer fully human, but no longer alien either. He thought of Sarah, living her normal life with her normal family, never knowing how close she'd come to a reality where such normality couldn't exist. He thought of all the truckers who would drive this pass, unaware of the protection surrounding them. "We should get back," Dave said. "There's a lot of work to do." They climbed into Leland's truck, driving back to their compound that officially didn't exist. Behind them, the mountain stood sentinel, scarred from battle but unbroken. Within it, the Guardian slept again, but lighter now, more watchful. It had expended much of its strength, and the universe had noticed Earth's vulnerability. More incursions would come. The cosmic entities that existed in spaces between spaces had tasted Earth's reality and found it desirable. They would return with greater numbers, better strategies, more sophisticated attempts to establish footholds in this physics-stable region of space. But Earth's defenders would be ready. The symbiotes would grow in number and power. The Guardians would adapt their strategies. And in places like Thompson Pass, where the barrier between worlds was thinnest, brave souls would stand watch. The truck climbed the hidden road to their compound, and Merle saw other symbiotes already at work, repairing damage, analyzing battle data, preparing for the next assault. This was their life now, part human, part Guardian, fully committed to protecting a world that didn't know they existed. Casey touched his shoulder. "No regrets? None that matter," he said, and meant it. The compound gates opened, welcoming them home. Not the home any of them had planned for, but the one necessity had created. The Guardian's presence hummed through their bones, a constant reminder of what they'd become and why. As night fell over Thompson Pass, the aurora borealis began its dance across the sky. But the symbiotes could see what normal humans couldn't. The lights were celebrating, performing a billion-year-old victory dance of a successful defense. The Earth remained intact, its reality stable, its life protected, for now. But in the deep spaces between stars, in dimensions where physics worked differently, things that coveted Earth's stability plotted and planned. They had been repelled, not defeated. They would return. And when they did, the symbiotes of Thompson Pass would be waiting. Merle stood at the window of the command center watching the normal truckers navigate the pass below. Each one represented what they were fighting for. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware of the cosmic forces trying to unmake their reality. "They're worth it," Casey said, joining him. "All of them. Worth becoming this. Worth fighting for." "Yes," Merle agreed. "They are." Outside, the mountain kept its ancient watch. Inside, its chosen defenders prepared for the next battle in a war that had been raging since the Earth formed. It was a war they might not win, but it was a war they would never stop fighting, because they were truckers, fundamentally. And truckers always delivered, no matter how dangerous the road, no matter how impossible the conditions. They would deliver Earth's safety, even if it cost them their humanity. The radio crackled with the normal trucker chatter, complaints about weather, jokes about dispatch, warnings about speed traps. Merle listened with ears that could now hear cosmic frequencies, finding comfort in the mundane humanity of it. This was what they protected, this beautiful, fragile, unaware normalcy. "Thompson Pass is clear," someone said over the radio. "Good driving tonight, folks." If only they knew, Merle thought. If only they knew what had been cleared from their path, what watched over them from the high places, what stood between them and forces that would unravel their existence. But they didn't need to know. That was the symbiote's burden and privilege. To know, to fight, to protect, all while the world drove on, unaware of its guardians. The weeks following the incursion brought unexpected challenges. The symbiotes discovered that channeling such massive amounts of guardian energy had left permanent changes in their bodies. Merle's transformations were becoming involuntary. Triggered by emotional spikes or even deep sleep, he would wake to find his bed frozen solid, his body partially shifted into its crystalline combat form. Casey was experiencing something different. Her connection to the Guardian was growing stronger daily, to the point where she could hear its thoughts even when it slept. She described it as listening to the dreams of a god. Vast, incomprehensible, but occasionally containing fragments of prophecy. "There's something else coming," she told the group during one of their meetings. "Not another incursion. Something from Earth itself. The Guardian keeps showing me images of the deep ocean, of places where tectonic plates meet." Leland's next visit confirmed her visions. "The Pacific Guardian is stirring, the one that sleeps beneath the Mariana Trench. It's been dormant longer than any of the others, but the recent incursion woke it." "Is that bad?" Patricia asked. "Unknown. The ocean guardians are different from the land-based ones. Older, more alien. The symbiotes at that site have been reporting strange phenomena. Creatures from the deep trenches surfacing, water temperatures fluctuating by dozens of degrees, and something they're calling the singing." Merle felt the Thompson Pass Guardian react to this news. A ripple of something that might have been concern passing through the mountain. The Guardians were connected, a global network of defense, but they were also individuals with their own personalities, their own agendas. That night, Merle was visited by something new. Not a dream, but a direct communication from the Guardian that bypassed his conscious mind. He found himself standing in a memory from billions of years ago, when Earth was young and the Guardians had first arrived. There had been 13 then, not 12. The 13th had been different. A Guardian designed not for defense but for offense. It had been deemed too dangerous and had been put into the deepest sleep, buried beneath what would become the Pacific Ocean. The incursion had woken it, and it was remembering its purpose. "We need to warn the others," Merle said upon waking, but Dave was already moving. "We all saw it," Dave said. "Every symbiote worldwide. The Guardians are sharing memories they've kept hidden." The implications were staggering. If the 13th Guardian fully woke, if it remembered its purpose as a weapon rather than a shield, it could be either Earth's greatest defender or its destroyer. Emergency protocols were activated. Symbiotes from coastal sites were relocated inland. The ocean-based symbiotes were pulled back from deep-water operations. Everyone waited to see what the 13th Guardian would do. They didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, something rose from the Mariana Trench. The few military vessels that witnessed it could barely describe what they saw. A creature of impossible size, something between solid and liquid, existing in more dimensions than should be possible. It breached the surface once, its form temporarily visible as a mountain of crystallized water and living darkness, then dove back into the depths. But in that brief moment of surfacing, it had communicated with every Guardian and symbiote on the planet. Its message was simple: the enemy comes from below as well as above. The cosmic incursions weren't the only threat. Deep beneath Earth's crust, in pockets of altered space-time left over from the planet's formation, things had been growing. Feeding on geothermal energy, evolving in isolation, waiting. The 13th Guardian hadn't been placed there to sleep. It had been positioned as a guard against the threat from below. "We're fighting a war on 2 fronts," Leland explained during an emergency briefing. "Cosmic entities from above, subterranean ones from below. The Guardians have been managing both threats for billions of years, but they're reaching their limits. The Thompson Pass symbiotes found themselves with a new mission. Their Guardian, being one of the strongest land-based ones, would need to support both defensive efforts. This meant more symbiotes were needed, and quickly. Merle was put in charge of recruitment. He spent days monitoring the pass, looking for candidates like Casey, people with the right combination of bravery, adaptability, and that indefinable quality that made them compatible with Guardian biology. He found 3 potentials in the first week. A veteran trucker named Miguel, who'd survived 7 avalanches in his career. A young indigenous woman named Aria, whose grandmother had been a shaman and who could sense the mountain's moods. An ex-military driver named Brooks who'd seen things in Afghanistan that had already stretched his conception of reality. Each was approached carefully, offered the choice with full disclosure of what it meant. Miguel accepted immediately, saying he'd rather die defending Earth than retire to a fishing boat. Aria required more convincing, but ultimately agreed when the Guardian itself spoke to her in her grandmother's voice. Brooks simply nodded and said, "Always knew there was something else out there. Might as well face it head on." Their transformations were smoother than the early ones had been. The Guardian had learned, adapted, refined its symbiosis process. The new symbiotes emerged with better control, clearer connections to the collective consciousness, and unique abilities shaped by their individual natures. Miguel could phase shift, moving through solid matter by temporarily existing in parallel dimensions. Aria became a living conduit for electromagnetic energy, able to generate EMPs that could disable the technology-based incursion entities. Brooks developed what could only be described as tactical precognition, seeing potential futures seconds before they occurred. The compound expanded to accommodate the growing population. What had started as a hidden refuge was becoming a military installation, complete with training facilities, research labs, and defensive systems that existed partially in other dimensions. But even as they grew stronger, signs of the underground threat were increasing. Earthquakes with impossible epicenters, originating from hollow spaces that shouldn't exist. Lakes suddenly draining, their water vanishing into portals that led nowhere. And in deep mines around the world, workers were reporting sounds, rhythmic, mechanical, purposeful. Casey's connection to the Guardian continued to deepen, and through her, they learned more about the subterranean threat. The entities below weren't invaders like the cosmic ones. They were Earth's first children, predating even the Guardians. They had been driven underground by the planet's changing conditions, evolving in isolation, developing their own civilization in the hollow spaces between tectonic plates. The Guardians' arrival had trapped them, sealing the passages between the surface and the deep places. For billions of years, they had been prisoners in their own world, but the recent incursion had weakened the seals. They were breaking free. "They're not evil," Casey explained after particularly intense communion with the Guardian. "They're angry. They want their world back." This presented a moral dilemma the symbiotes hadn't expected. The cosmic entities were clearly invasive, incompatible with Earth's life. But the subterranean ones had as much claim to the planet as humans did. Maybe more. Negotiations were attempted. The ocean symbiotes, working with the 13th Guardian, managed to establish communication with the underground civilization. The language barrier was immense. They communicated through vibrations in the Earth's crust, patterns of heat and pressure that took weeks to decipher. The message that finally came through was both hopeful and terrifying. Share or war. Humanity would have to make a choice. Share the Earth with beings that had lived in its depths since before life colonized the land, or fight another war on another front with resources already stretched thin. The government response was predictable. Military forces were mobilized to seal mine shafts, to bomb suspected emergence points, to maintain humanity's dominance. But the symbiotes knew this was futile. The subterraneans had been preparing for longer than human civilization had existed. If it came to war, the surface would lose. It was Merle who proposed the radical solution. We become bridges again, not just between humans and Guardians, but between surface and depth. The idea was insane, dangerous, potentially catastrophic, but it was also the only option that didn't end in extinction for one side or the other. Volunteers were requested. Merle, Casey, and surprisingly Brooks stepped forward. They would undergo a second transformation, allowing the subterranean energy to merge with their guardian-enhanced biology. They would become triple hybrids, human, guardian, and deep dweller. The process was agonizing. Where the guardian transformation had been cold, clinical, this was hot, primal. Merle felt his bones restructure to withstand pressures that would crush normal matter. His nervous system rewired to process sensory input that had no human equivalent. His consciousness expanded again, touching minds that had never seen sunlight, that measured time in geological epochs. When it was over, he stood transformed again. His skin could shift between normal, crystalline, and now a new form. Something like living rock that pulsed with deep heat. He could survive in the deepest trenches, the highest peaks, and everywhere in between. Casey's transformation gave her the ability to hear the earth itself. Every fault line, every magma flow, every underground river. She became a living seismograph, able to predict and potentially prevent earthquakes. Brooks became something like a tactical coordinator for 3 different species. His mind capable of processing the vastly different ways humans, guardians, and subterraneans approached conflict and cooperation. Together, they descended into the earth for the first diplomatic meeting between surface and depth in geological time. The journey down was a descent through history itself, passing layers that recorded every mass extinction, every climate shift, every moment of Earth's violent evolution.